crazy that we're here because of politics. Jordan Kealy, politics. Oh my.
I never would have thought about it 5 years ago where I'm at right now.
Isn't it wild?
It was one of those things that I got tired of just sitting off to the side, seeing things change. And our way of life is just kind of degrading. You look at the taxes that we pay now in comparison to 20 years ago.
If you're to form government, never mind if you're not even government, you're just opposition. How do you deal with that?
One thing that I can tell you is that I would never consider it vote splitting when you're talking about voting in your area for what you believe in.
Standing outside, I didn't know that was a thing until recently. If you don't like it, just go have a break.
Or say the party doesn't like it. Amazing how that works, eh? I'd never do that. I'd rather get kicked out of the party.
Yeah.
And to be the only one, like, you think about that's a lonely position if you're the only one.
Yeah.
Struggling healthcare system. Those are things where they change our quality of life, and then you even financially, when you look at everything else, that changes our quality of life. But I believe that with what's happening right now and how people are being represented, that they're not happy and they want change.
Well, cheers.
Cheers. Good times.
And I can turn around and tell people, I believe in what this party has. Like, it's not like I believe in 60% of their values of the party. Like, this party matches my values. So in my area, if you're voting for me, it aligns with that party.
Thanks for putting yourself in the line of fire and trying to be that change.
Well, it's been like 6 months overdue.
Has been. We've been yapping about this long enough, haven't we?
You betcha.
Well, welcome to the studio. It's crazy that we're here because of politics. Jordan Kealy, politics. Oh my.
I never would have thought about it 5 years ago where I'm at right now.
Isn't it wild? What a ride.
Unreal.
Well, I can't wait to get into it, but there's a couple things I want to touch on. One, we went through this a little bit earlier, and every guest that comes on to Kevin Unscripted since the first one always had a little goodie bag. So I wanted to give that to you because normally I don't throw it in the recording, but we kind of went through it earlier. It's got a mug, It's got a bunch of stickers.
I love it.
That's awesome, isn't it? Well, some of the people too that have been here previously, like Cat have today, and some other people on that table, they like to leave little trinkets for future guests. So it's kind of fun to be able to go through it and pick and choose and fill a little goodie bag.
Well, I brought you farmer's sausage, so we can always leave that on there from my farm.
No, I'm eating that.
Yeah, I kind of figured that.
Yeah, that's actually the same stuff you sold at the farmer's market too.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's all grass fed and finished off of our farm.
Nice.
So it's all natural.
That's a big deal for a lot of people now, isn't it?
It is. There's a lot of people with a lot of allergies and food sensitivities, and they're just adding more glyphosates and sprays to different products, and people are becoming more sensitive. So we tried to keep our product as natural as possible.
Kealy Farms. There's a plug and a shout out right there. So early. Well, why don't I give you a little bit of an overview here? It's not going to be very lengthy, but you can tell me how accurate it is. And we'll give, I guess, the listener a little bit of idea who you are. Jordan Kealy, born in southern BC and moved to Fort St. John 2004. Settled down, calling Fort St. John home with your wife, Karen. So shout out to Karen. Yeah. And, you got a homestead and settled right in. Always been active, involved in local community, like we were just talking about with the farmers market. I believe you're president.
Yes. Are you not? Yeah, I'm president of the farmers market, and it's the demand that of people that are looking for local products and things that are handmade and trying to contribute to local infrastructure is just amazing. Like
Shop
right
local.
Now, for Christmas time, there are markets all over the place, and they're doing amazing because a lot of their products, they're not even the same price as what it's costing in the stores. In the stores, you just get it where it's made in China.
Yeah.
And this one, at a lot of these markets, you're getting stuff that's crafted by hand by locals, and it can be the same price, a little bit more or a little bit less.
Yeah.
That it's actually, that's one thing about prices going up. It actually made it so then local infrastructure can benefit off of it as well.
Well, the one thing about organic is I think it's putting a different value on craftsmanship and quality, isn't it? People are starting to now take that into enough of a value or interest where they're willing to pay the higher dollar figure because they know there's that much more value in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the beginning of this year, this isn't really related to politics, but at the farmers market, we changed over to the BC Farmers Market Association. And by doing that, they had a program for food coupons that we were able to actually supply the Women's Resource Center with $8,000 worth of coupons.
Oh, wow.
And the government contributed to that. And then those the people there are able to come to the farmers market and get local fresh produce. So that was $8,000 worth of product that people wouldn't have got before that. So
no kidding.
Absolutely amazing. Some of the things that are around that you can look into are definitely worth it. So that was one of the benefits that we had by taking that market and going all local, handmade, and produced.
But these are things though that I don't think the average person realizes until you get involved.
Yeah.
You know, and through politics and whatnot, you start learning some of these programs, advantages, and incentives, I guess, at the end of the day for being able to promote certain things. Yeah,
and that's the tough thing too, is that when you get into different programs and volunteering and helping run societies or volunteering for the societies, there's not a lot of people doing it anymore. Yeah. So sometimes it's a bit more difficult, but I'm starting to see more and more of a younger generation get into it, that their kids are getting a bit older now and they can start helping, and some of the groups are really starting to flourish. It's a bit of a paradigm shift. I sure hope so. Yeah. Well, let me finish this off here. Sure. Because it kind of elaborates a little bit more from the farmers market to kind of explain who you are. So I guess motivated by the need for change, especially in rural areas where you reside. You ran for the PRRD, Electoral B, and on October 15th, 2022, you were elected as Electoral B. What is that, a director? A director, yeah. So your Electoral B, it covers 86,000 square kilometers spanning from the Sikanee Chief to Pink Mountain, Cecil Lake, and Clayhurst, and includes 4 First Nations and a swath of different industries ranging from oil and gas, farming, forestry. I mean, all kinds of things in an area that size, almost the size of some countries, and responding to inadequate. Oh man, was that ever a stumble? That was awesome. I love it. To provincial government approaches to issues like wildfires, healthcare, and economic policies. You felt there was more value in getting involved on a provincial level. Deciding to run for the BC provincial election with the Conservative Party, you announced your intentions for standing for Peace River North MLA. And then later on, as of, I guess, last night, November 24th, 2023, less than 24 hours ago, it was publicly announced that you are going to be running as a candidate for MLA BC Peace River North. Well, congratulations. That's a big deal. Thank you. Wow. And all within such a short period of time. Like you went from the PRRD elected, probably just over a year now today. Yep. And now all of a sudden you're getting involved on the provincial end of things. And you know, if you had seen me a year ago, I really didn't want to get into the provincial side of things, dealing with party politics. I just wanted to help local. And when I got into local, there's a lot of things that I was able to help with. I was able to interact with a huge amount of constituents. That area B is huge, and it's very diverse. The creeds of people that are around and the different types of communities that you run into between Russians, Hutterites, First Nations. It's a very complex area, and it's 2/3 the size of the Peace region. For people that might listen to this from the Lower Mainland, it's 5 times the size of the Lower Mainland. Wow.
5 times.
Yeah, that's just Area B.
It's just weird how they base it off of population density, but they don't take into consideration land mass and what that actually covers. Because like you mentioned there earlier, the amount of diversity and economic impacts that has.
Yeah.
You're dealing with stuff that I don't think anybody else has to deal with, even within, I think, a political career, like a lifetime, because of all the different nuances. They have different ministers that deal with all the different breakdowns of it all when it comes to the forestry and healthcare, First Nations. I mean, all the nuance of all of that, what that area encompasses. We're not talking a street and a few blocks in a city.
No, it's there's actually, if you go to the top end of Williston Lake, there's a First Nation up there that the only way that you can get to them is either fly, jet boat, or you drive all the way down to Prince George and then up to them at Fort Ware.
Wow, that's pretty remote.
And that's still part of Area B. So it's you can drive from the bottom. You could go from Clayhurst all the way up to Buckinghorse, and that's probably going to take you about 6 hours.
Oh, wow.
So and that's only going one direction, Area B. If you go the other way, it really is big into, when you classify all the different types of industries that are there. There's a lot to cover. Trying to touch base with all the communities and the dynamics of those communities. Some of the communities, they don't really want to talk to public officials.
Yeah.
They're happy just being left by themselves. There's actually a lot of Area B where they're happy just to be left alone in Area B. When I moved up from the Lower Mainland, I saw how much the Lower Mainland changed from when I was a child in Langley, and how much it pushed out from Vancouver, and how different things got pushed out with it. The drugs, the crime, the mentality shift between people, where they don't really care as much for each other. They won't go to their way to help each other. They're very narrow-minded in their own focus. And then when I moved up here for work for my apprenticeship, I absolutely loved it. I loved the freedom of living out in the country. And then when I met my wife, I loved it even more, that we ended up finding our farm, and it's just blossomed ever since. So we went from a handful of critters that we got up to 130 head of cows. We've had a wide variety of animals, and now we're down to about 30 cows. And we do a meat program where we sell direct to people. And it was another thing where I was doing that for our own local infrastructure, because so much is globalized nowadays.
Yeah.
And everything about globalization, at first it was really nice that we could get things cheaper, but then everything goes out of our country.
Yeah.
It's made out of our country. It's sold here. Most of the time, the money just leaves our country, and it's not something that benefits our area or our province or our country in a lot of cases. So, trying to figure out different changes. I've been looking at those all this time. I never thought that I'd get into politics 5 years ago. It was one of those things that I got tired of just sitting off to the side, seeing things change. And our way of life is just kind of degrading. You look at the taxes that we pay now in comparison to 20 years ago. We're literally getting taxed to death, because they even go after the state.
Yeah.
And I wrote down a list, and I could think of 20 different taxes. And it just sucks the life by doing tax on top of tax on top of tax. You're sucking the life out of the people. Whereas I really think that we have amazing resources in Canada that we can offer something that very few places in the world can. And that's the fact that we have these resources. We can harvest them and produce them in a manner that's sustainable and environmentally friendly. But at the same time, if we actually develop those products here, all of that is fresh tax dollars and fresh money that goes into our country. Right now, that's all getting shut down. Like, our logging industry is taking a huge hit. Agriculture is having a really hard time. I went from 100 head of cows down to 30.
Wow.
Because it's between the weather and just how expensive things are. It just isn't. It's so difficult to try and make it work. And right now, we're not seeing those supports on actually helping the resource sector and the industrial sector or the production sector. That if they cut back on a lot of those, all it does is make it so then they have to harvest those tax dollars somewhere else, and that's us right now.
Yeah.
So you see that
the blue collar.
Yeah, you see that as an example of the carbon tax. It is the one thing that you could use to cause inflation. It ripples through every sector in the economy, and the only thing it does is harvest money. It doesn't change the environment. Me paying carbon tax didn't help my farm with the 30% of hay that I had compared to last year.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you can't stop Mother Nature. You can roll and adapt.
Yeah.
And try and improve. And I think that's one of the main things that we really have to try and work on that we're not seeing right now. And it's trying to just tax people. It's going to get to a certain point, and I think that's where we're seeing a lot more people speak up and voice their opinions now, because they're tired of that. They want to see something change, and that's normally where you see the polarization in politics. That it'll roll from one spectrum and then flip to the other. That one end will spend and promise like crazy, and then when it gets too far, he'll flip to the other end, and then you have to fix everything, and you have to try and correct the trend that it's on. And right now, it's scary where our country is going. When you look at the national debt, all the provincial debts, you add them up. When you add all of that up, it's almost $3 trillion.
It makes you wonder how it's even possible, because of it puts it into perspective when you go with the population and how hard people are actually being taxed. And then you're talking about billions and trillions and all this other money that if you were to spread over just a population density is impossible for any one person to be able to pay back or generate. So you know that it's coming from other sources of revenue, which is obviously from industry and a lot of other things that are producing, a tax revenue of one form or another. And then they're trying to, underneath moral justification, cut the actual source of where the real revenue is coming from, and then offset that with personal taxes. And that's just not going to happen. It's impossible to tax, however many people, like Canada's 38 million people, the province of BC, I'm not sure how many million people is in BC right now, but look, taxing the personal individual when you're talking about revenue provincially being on the billions, and where does that come from? Industry. You cut the industry and think you're going to offset that with personal taxes. Well, those individuals work within the industry, which end up producing more revenue than if you were to tax the individual. Never mind, it gives him the ability to work and actually generate revenue. So it's backwards when you think about it.
And when you highlight the resource sector, industrial sector, even production areas, you really do highlight all the towns and cities that would otherwise just shut down. Like we've seen it as a trend that when you cut back on certain resources, you're killing towns at the same time.
Well, you see it all the way up and down provincially, and Alaska Highway especially. It's riddled with different camps and towns that have come and gone, 10, 20-year lifespan. Look at Tumbler Ridge. Well, look at Fort St. John. Peaks and valleys.
Yeah, we see a transition, and I think even going back to where we originally started on that with Area B, getting into trying to help and make a difference in that area. Originally, when it came up for the nominations to go through, the previous director, her name's Karen Goody, and she was in it for 34 years. Absolutely amazing woman. She decided to not put her name forward again, and there was no nominations. And I'm like, wow, nobody's stepping forward to help. So I asked her, and I'm like, well, what happens if nobody is nominated? She's like, oh, well, the province can just put somebody in place from Vancouver if they want.
Well, I'll drop in appointment. Like they'll just drop ship somebody.
They can just place somebody, and that blew my mind that you could take somebody from another region that knows absolutely nothing about it and actually have them control an area. Like we went in Area B, we went through different things like building code changes where they use square footage as a control. So if you had two chicken coops, those two chicken coops covered certain square footage, and it made it so then you couldn't do an addition to your house for your baby that you just had. And that happened. There's a referendum that got rid of that in Area B. I think that was about 10 years ago. But that's stuff like that. It really made me think about how things could change, and the stuff that I saw in the Lower Mainland that sometimes just didn't make sense at all. I didn't want to see that happen up here. So I put my nomination in the next day.
Oh, wow. Holy.
And then lo and behold, I think it was 4 days later, then there was two other people that put their names in as well. So then I was running against two other people. And then I ended up winning the election. And it's been great getting into local politics, quite a steep learning curve, and the different experiences, conferences that you go to. Even sitting at a board table where there's 8 municipal directors and then 4 rural. And the municipal can pretty much control what happens in the rural areas sometimes. The communication that you have to try and establish there is quite the balancing act. And I think it worked really well. I think when we saw the emergencies that we had this year, like the wildfires, there was a lot of improvements that could be had when it came to communication with like BC Wildfire, and it was something that I was working very closely with the chair at the time, and then he was contacting BC Wildfire and other ministers at the same time. And we also, it really would have helped if the locals had more resources, training, equipment, financial, because there was some of the fires where it was just locals fighting those fires.
Wow.
And it's...
and that's always frowned upon too, isn't it? Like when locals actually try and actually get involved and save their own land, it's frowned upon, and people will publicly shame them because... they're putting themselves at risk, which is taken away from resources from, firefighters that are already stretched thin. And so there's that, like, what do you want them to do? But then also in a lot of cases last summer, which was interesting, were the people that did stand up and actually fight and make a big difference and bring industry and a lot of resources together. They were praised for it. And I'm glad for that, because that was reassuring. That was the one thing that I was like, man, now we're going to end up demonizing these people who are fighting literally for their livelihood.
Yep.
But they were supported. So that's a shift that you normally otherwise wouldn't have seen.
Yeah. So I had fires not too far away from my farm on both sides, and it was emergency evacs on one side, emergency evacuations on another side, where we were calving with our cows. And one of our friends ended up having to evac, so they brought their cows to our place, and they were calving at the same time. So we were calving out another farm set of cows at the same time as our own.
Wow!
Just trying to make things work, and then
mayhem.
And it was unreal. I got training for elected officials on emergency disasters. And after I had finished that training, I came home, and there was a fire in Boundary Lake. And it had come across from the Boundary Lake side, or from the Alberta side, and how to respond to it. And it's unreal how fast that worked and transitioned. And I think some of the locals, depending on what the fire is like, sometimes a farmer, they know how to start fires sometimes, and they know how to put them out.
Yeah.
And they've done it for a really long time. They're pretty good at it. You give them the tools to do it, and they could probably do it more effective. It's an annual
routine for them.
Yeah.
They definitely have a lot more awareness about what's going on. Now, I get that sometimes things get away, but at least they're reacting a whole lot more of presence of mind than a lot of people who see a fire and completely lose their mind. Yeah.
And they don't have resources like a helicopter, so that's definitely a big... If they had communication with the eye in the sky, that makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
And the downside was that there was 10 firefighters this year in BC. I'm pretty sure it's 10 that did lose their lives when it came to helping and fight fires. Unfortunately, most of them were under the age of 35. So you've really got a whole bunch of young people that are going into this job, and it's dangerous. And they may not have all the skills or the best way of doing things. And that's why I was we were trying to highlight getting locals involved because they've got a lot of those skills already. Some of them are fully trained, and trying to promote that. And when I went to UBCM, I took that there to the ministers and I asked for that. And after a month, I didn't see anything. But the thing that I did see was that they wanted to revise their Emergencies Act and incorporate things in it that made it way more difficult for the areas. Tax the area for when it came to...
So Emergencies Act as far as natural disasters?
Emergencies Act, there's a lot of different things. So you could think of water, you could think of drugs, you could think of fires, you could think of earthquakes. All these things can have an emergency declared, and it does certain things through government. They can have some pretty strong powers that a lot of people may not know about. And we were looking for smaller things to help our particular scenario, and rather than trying to make that work, instead they're starting from scratch with a whole new thing that's very complicated. And I got really frustrated because just from on my farm being around all these fires, I got walking pneumonia, and I have never had any health problems like that before. Really? Just from the amount of smoke. Like wow. It was all year long. Like the fire is still burning up in Donnie Creek.
Yeah, in the muskeg. They're root fires.
It's still going, and it'll probably go all winter long.
Yeah, for sure. And then you're going to be dealing with it come spring.
So for me, that was really personal. Like I was sick with that for 2-3 months before I actually got rid of it. But like the whole time, we still had smoke, and sometimes it was really bad. So doing local politics, I really love it. I love seeing everybody on a local level, but a lot of the main concerns and problems that we have in our area aren't local. They're provincial.
So the difference, I'd like to highlight a little bit about how there's a few elements going on when it comes to getting involved, because, there's a demand, there's a workload, there's, I think, an awareness and a learning curve that goes with it. The feasibility to be able to transition from, income, like farming, and then having an income, the impact that has on, Karen and your wife, maybe her perspectives, abilities to be able to juggle what you had up to that point, and then getting involved into politics in a way where that's taken a large part of your time, the commitment, not only with your time, but financially, the feasibility that goes with it. That must have been, that's something that is in the forefront of just about anybody who wants to get involved. So how did that affect you? Like, what did you do to be able to manage that transition from your day-to-day and everybody's crushing schedule and lifestyle to where you were like, man, I feel not only like this is something I need to do, but what's it going to take to transition, the feasibility and all of that?
So the transition, it did have to happen over time and figure out exactly what things I did have to balance. With the farm, having to downsize, that was one of the things that I knew might have to happen. And the way that it worked with the shortage of hay, it just worked that way. The difference between having the farm or myself being a mechanic and having a service truck and working that way financially compared to doing the local director position is huge. You can look up the remuneration for a rural director. Anybody can go online and look it up. It's $28,000 for the year.
Wow. So the reimbursement is not that high.
It really is. It's not much above minimum wage. Now that you get paid for meetings and kilometers and stuff. But to try and get people that really care to get into it, it's not an easy thing to get into because the money's not there. The main reason that I got into it was to try and make that change and help. I was willing to sacrifice financially to make that difference. And we all have different motives for doing things. And the main reason that I got into politics was a very personal reason. And it's really what drives me to help and make things better.
Yeah, but it's something that also resonated with a lot of people, because when I was listening to you talk about different points and things that frustrated you, that is something that I think a lot of people are frustrated at. But the difference between a lot of people and you is the fact that you're able to put that much effort and not be the person to stand aside and say, okay, well, I have some very legitimate reasons why I shouldn't, or I can't, or I won't, to where the sacrifice and putting yourself involved. That's what I meant, like that transition into having to actually put your whole life and restructure everything in a way where it made it not only feasible, but you're having to do it because of a moral position, because you're taking a hit on every other possible level. You worked your way up to a homestead, a farm, and everything, and you're putting that not only on hold, but trying to sustain it with a lower income and more of your time being devoted to something else. Not many people are willing to do that. Never mind the ability to do it, but that's a big testament it's not just, I think, how strongly you feel about something, because I think everybody feels strongly about it. You see it all the time. I mean, people are running on a very high emotion. So that doesn't have, I think, as much of a play into it as people would like think they would like to think. It's just the principle and the fact that by not doing something, could you live with yourself knowing that bothered you so much that in not doing it, are you going to be able to sleep? And when people say there's nothing we can do, and what can we do, and that's manifesting in frustration, anxiety, and issues in other ways, you are like, well, there has to be something to do, and I'll take a hit in trying to make sure that I get involved in a way to say that at least if I lose, I did everything within my power to be a part of that change.
Yeah, and that's exactly what was said to me that by somebody else, was that they asked, well, if you don't do it, are you going to regret it?
Yeah.
And I really think I completely would have regretted it. I got into it because I love my way of life. But right now, when you see things that are trickling in, especially on the provincial side, like the drugs, the crime, struggling healthcare system, those are things where they change our quality of life. And then even financially, when you look at everything else, that changes our quality of life. For me personally, I'm willing to make that transition, to try and do that on the local politics side. I think I transitioned and hit that learning curve really well. I think I surprised a lot of people. They think that I'm a big dumb guy. But most of the time, if they're on the other side of the table at the board, I think that they're surprised with that I can come across and speak very eloquently.
Yeah, articulate.
And be articulate, and that I love playing chess, and that's one of those things where I look at everything as a game of chess. And I think I've surprised a lot of people with how things go, and that is one of the things of how I look at how to try and make that change happen.
So when it comes to getting familiar, you made that transition, you're a director at Area B, PRRD. That's a big step in itself. Now, before we get into the MLA part, how did you see the fact that what you were able to do and accomplish within being a regional director was a positive, and how that affected a key component here that goes very unnoticed a lot of times, and that's, the wife. That affects people. Like, I know if I know Karen is similar to my wife, she doesn't like the public eye. She doesn't like any of that kind of stuff. Even bringing up a name is like, ooh. But at the end of the day, it affects, there's two people involved. And then when maybe you might be criticized in one way or the other, there's an added workload on the home front, behind the scenes, and almost sometimes catch collateral down, like, shots, as far as digs and whatnot. So when you were on the regional end of things, were you able to kind of say, okay, well, this is something that I see a lot of value in, and it was a joint connection with you and Karen to be able to navigate through all of that? Like, what did you see that was satisfying enough to be able to stay with that and then launch you into the MLA position, or running as MLA as a candidate?
Yeah, so my wife probably isn't going to like me talking about her.
Well, I know, but
she definitely is an introvert. That I'm an extrovert, and I definitely have no problems making a stand on things. My wife loves the farm. She loves being able to deal with animals. She'd rather deal with animals than people. And the people that we have involved in our lives absolutely love dealing with her. Most of the time she doesn't want to be the center of attention at all. She's definitely got different things that she's dealing with too. And it's a balance that, she's got certain, disabilities that we, juggle, how to balance things. So far through local government, if I'm gone for a week to a conference, then I need to make sure that things are taken care of that maybe she might not be able to take care of it. So it is a balance. Doing the MLA position, it will make it so that I'm away from home more. I think that's something that we can handle. Just because I have worked as a tradesperson, as a millwright in Fort Mac. I was doing 2 weeks in, 2 weeks out, and 1 week in, 1 week out. I think it's a bit of juggling, but it's finding out I can adapt very well, and I think I can make that work pretty good. Trying to I think like yourself, when it comes to going to events and stuff, sometimes it might just be you going to the event because your wife doesn't want to go with you.
Yeah.
and if she's happy that way, then that's what works best. And sometimes, you go down to Vancouver and you deal with a lot of NDP politicians. You're happy to come home to the farm and be around just cows.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really, the farm is what helps ground me. Same with my wife. So when I have that transition, I think it works very well. I don't get caught up in the politics. It doesn't become just my life. That I've got something grounded, and it keeps me stable at home.
Politics can go from public perception, and that's just it. Politics seem to encompass a lot of, things that you can separate. But the weird thing about politics is that you can almost take it to a level of where it gets personal with the umbrella of politics. And to keep those two things separate can be very difficult. People don't distinguish politics from the person. They don't have, I think, that perception. It can get very personal, and almost kind of, if that was dealt with in a day-to-day, people would react a lot differently and feel like they can get away with a lot more because, it's a politician. So you've dealt with, I think, some interesting scenarios, when it came to, situations and topics within the PRRD. Have they been something where concern has been risen as to maybe how that would your approach and maybe a judgment call would have been shifted because of the pressures that might come along with it?
I think it's tough when you might see things differently than others, especially when you sit on a board. The dynamics, the different types of people that are on that board, the dynamics of the areas that they represent. Like when you come to that board, it's supposed to be as the whole region. So sometimes that's a hard thing to work with when there's been certain things where I'll vote a certain way and everybody else might vote against me. It's just the way it goes. I think the whole time that I've been in that position, I stay in touch with my constituents very well. And I stick with what I think they want me to represent. And I don't back down. When I say that I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. Or if I say that I'm going to fight for something, well, then I'll fight that bully. I have no problem with that. Like I enjoy beating up bullies. But it's
I would love to say, where does that come from? But
yeah.
So the MLA position, and I think we'll probably skirt around, I have a few questions later on that'll kind of tie in some other stuff, but the MLA position itself, what about, like, that is, I think, a position that has got a requirement that is far higher than the average person realizes. This is something I learned myself just in, I guess, Dan Davies and Mike Burney, one of the things that I did learn from them is when I went down to Victoria and I seen what the workload was like, you're gone. You're flying, you're flying out Sunday night and you're getting back Friday night. You're home for one day and then you got local stuff to have to deal with. And then when your legislature is down, you've got, local stuff to have to work with. Was that a lot of the requirements that you weren't, like, how did you manage all of that and the commitment that it's going to take to be able to put your name in the ring as a candidate? Like, that's a huge thing. Like, what was the struggles and the drawbacks for you to be able to mull through and commit when it came to that level?
Oh, I'd say out of everything, the biggest thing was the time that I'd spent away from the farm. That's probably the hardest thing that I'll have to face, and dealing with that is a balancing act. How to make it manage so then it works with your family at the same time. I think that's the most important thing. And so far, going with my involvement into the PRD, I've been able to handle that learning curve, a steep learning curve, very well, surprisingly well. I had no idea that I was really good at this, and that a lot of people have faith that I could do a really good job in this as well. The learning curve going forward as MLA, I think it's the same thing, that I don't have a problem taking that on. I think I'm fully capable of doing it. It's just a matter of transitioning. And right now, if I can make it, so then we could get rid of the carbon tax or make our quality of life better. That's not just an improvement to my life, but that's an improvement to a vast amount of people. Like it's one of those things where the difference that I can help make in things, you can't put money on that. And that's one of the things that's what makes me happy, is that if I can actually make a difference in that kind of way. I'm not doing this for money or power. I couldn't care less about that power. The money, if it pays better than the local director position,
that's a bonus.
That would be a bonus, because that was a big hit, but I was willing to do that. It was something that I wanted to do to try and make a difference.
So when it comes to making a difference, and you felt that your place was stepping up into the provincial level, what areas were you starting to feel, and this is a multifaceted question, I know that, but I think I don't know how else to phrase some of this, but there's already a provincial government in place. What was it that you felt you wanted to make changes on, wasn't being accomplished, and how you got into the Conservative BC Party that got you to where, okay, this is actually something I can really commit myself to on that level, and eventually led to you running as a candidate for the Conservative, the BC Party?
It's a
big doozy
question,
for sure. But we can break it down into, okay, the provincial end of things. BC River North, you're going against Dan Davies now, and this is his area. So what were you seeing that you were like, okay, I need to get involved to be able to make the changes that obviously aren't being done by our current government? And when I say government, it's opposition, right? Government. It's not elected government. What did that look like for you?
Technically, it's not his area. It's the area he represents. So representing your constituents is the number one thing.
Okay.
If I've heard so many different times that I'll have concerns that I have to deal with and try and help people when they're provincial issues. And this past year in local government, that has happened probably, I'd say 70% of the time. And we try our hardest to advocate and to try and make that work with the current cabinet ministers and shadow ministers. It's definitely a different balance that if you're in opposition in comparison to being in power. But I believe that with what's happening right now and how people are being represented, that they're not happy and they want change. They don't trust who's in this current system to actually help them. And I think that's one of those things where a lot of people trust that I could do this. It's not something that I planned on doing a long time ago, or I wasn't planning on being a career politician. I don't even like being called a politician. Because really it's being a mechanic, I'm just used to fixing things. And when I see this system, there are a lot of things that need to get fixed.
And you think that within a party, so did you entertain maybe independent versus running within a party? And like the pros and cons between the two of them?
I think the independents, to actually make major change, the independents, they're very limited to a certain, like there's very few scenarios where like they can have that deciding vote. So it's when you've got if a conservative party can roll in there, get power, that's where you have enough people on the same team. And right now in that house, there's only two people sitting in the Conservative Party on one spectrum. That's pretty much two common sense perspectives.
Yeah.
And people talk about vote splitting. Oh, you do this, then it's vote splitting between BC United and Conservatives. Well, right now, there's no Conservatives in that house. Like really, you have two people that left the United Party because they tried to represent that spectrum. And they have conservative values. And now they're John Rustad, he's the leader of the party. He got kicked out of BC United for trying to stick up for what constituents want. So when I see somebody like that stands their ground on an issue, even though he may be the only person in that house that's voting against something, he's voting for how he believes and how his constituents believe. And the one thing that I can tell you is that I would never consider it vote splitting when you're talking about voting in your area for what you believe in. And the fact that when it comes to the conservative values of how much it could actually help what we have up here, if we can make that happen across the whole province, that's where we really make a big difference. Because right now, when you look at the current system, it has swung socialist so much. And my personal opinion with BC United, they can promise one thing or another, but whether or not they actually make it happen is a different thing. Yeah. And when you look at the carbon tax, they brought it in, and now they're talking about trying to get rid of parts of it. The Conservatives, they have a pretty clear platform. They're fixed on that. They're not promising things that the NDP are promising. What they have there, they're sticking to it. And that's one of the things that I really like, is that when I see that platform, it has a bunch of fixes on it that helps our way of life. And I can turn around and tell people, I believe in what this party has. Like, it's not like I believe in 60% of their values of the party. Like this party matches my values. So in my area, if you're voting for me, it aligns with that party. And I think that's my biggest driver about the Conservative Party, is that going back a year ago, it wasn't really a major option. And the way that it's growing now, I think they were just at 72 ridings established.
Yeah. Yeah, their polling that's not only established, but the polls are through the roof.
They're polling great, and they were polling great, and they didn't even really have any candidates. So now they plan on having a riding in every area established, and they're going to have candidates. And I think they're going to come in with a momentum where the pendulum is going to swing.
Yeah.
And
there is a paradigm shift. And to speak to the vote splitting, and I guess one of the things that I think a lot of people are seeing when it comes to that with the BC United Party is that they do consider themselves a centralist party. And I guess some of the concern might be that what does that mean, considering the center has shifted so far left that you don't know where that is? And maybe that's a big frustration for a lot of people when there is no consistency. It's decisions are based off of polls, and so they could be opposite directions from one quarter to the other, even 1 year to the other.
So catching your point there when it comes to the left and centrist and the right, right now it is far left. Like right now, the way everything's going is socialist. To fix that, like if that pendulum swings, the center's not going to fix it.
No,
we pretty much have to go. We've seen it throughout history several times. It goes to the other spectrum in order to be able to fix all of those issues. And that's pretty much what has to happen. I don't think any of these issues, like it's, you see BC United get in, oh, we'll just take a little bit of the carbon tax off. Well, I'm sorry. I think we need to get rid of that carbon tax completely. And John Rustad is promising that he's getting rid of other taxes too. We need that. We need that money back in order to live. If it goes to where we have to look at our resources and highlight them more, I think we can sustainably utilize resources in this country better than any other. And we're not the ones polluting the planet. Like nowhere even close. And right now they're pushing us that we have to sacrifice our lives to try and make a difference to the planet, where when you look at them taxing us with carbon tax and they say it's for the environment, they're doing nothing with that tax to help the environment.
Yeah.
So they're just stealing your money.
With good intentions. It's under an umbrella, right? What about the party now? Like, you've obviously looked at what the party stands for. What happens? Like, there's a party whip typically in every party, and that's been a bit of an issue in the past. When it came to, you mentioned John Rustad, he was part of the BC United party whip, and then the leader Kevin Falcon ousted him out of the party because he stood his ground on something he believed in, along with a few other people, and they've blocked other people that were air quote conservatives, Aaron Gunn and a whole bunch of, other people that we can go and make examples of. But that's, I think, the outcome when you don't align with the party narrative, their message, so what happens now with conservative BC as a party? Is there a concern with that? Like, where you want to stand your ground, you want to represent your area and constituents, but what happens now as a party? You got to unite, and if you don't want to vote, they're going to ask you down at the legislature to go have a smoke or a coffee while they make a vote. What happens in a situation like that?
So I've actually asked that question very directly at John. And I said, when it comes to representing my area, like I represent my area and what my constituents want. If I'm not going to change that. And so far, with the way that he got kicked out of BC United, I think that really enforced within him that he doesn't want to do that to others that are just trying to represent their area. And he told me that he wants to let the candidates represent their areas. And I personally believe that, because I don't think the way that he got kicked out, he doesn't want to do that to others, especially if they believe that they did it for good reason. So when it comes to the whip, I don't think that's the scenario. And even if it gets there, I'm still doing what my constituents want me to do.
That's awesome.
That's what it's all about.
What about the area do you want to be able to address? So there's the political, party, breakdown. Okay, this is what the party represents. Going back to what you had seen now with locally, with our local government and the representation that was being made. What are you wanting to see as far as the differences and the impact and changes locally that you want to address on a provincial level that you weren't able to get to on the regional end of things?
So the number one is financially, we need a better way of life. There's a lot of people that can't afford what they need. Way more people needing food banks. Even the program that I mentioned with the farmers market, people were so happy that we could just offer that they could get food. I think financial is probably my number one, and that's not just regional, that's throughout the whole province. Number two would probably be our healthcare system, that it needs a reform. And number three would be drugs, especially hardcore drugs, need to be recriminalized. We have such a problem with that right now that never existed going back 20 years ago. They just allowed people to pack around fentanyl. 2.5 grams of fentanyl easily kills 20 people.
Yeah,
that you can just pack that around. It doesn't make any sense why they're allowing this to happen. And if we want to help people that are in that scenario, we can't just keep on giving them more drugs. Say, here's a safe space, keep on doing it. It's poison. We're just enabling them to take more poison. We need to help treat people that are in that scenario right now. Once they're done that treatment, when they come out, they can't be around those drugs being everywhere. As soon as they're stressed or whatever triggered them before is going to make that happen again. And those drugs are going to be right there if they're not recriminalized, and we're not supporting the police and the prosecution to get rid of them. We need to get rid of the larger traffickers to get rid of this, because the poison that is going around right now, it's killing more people than ever. It's not something mild like marijuana or alcohol. These are drugs that carfentanil, it's so strong that you can have the tip of your pen could have a little bit on the table, and I could touch it with my fingers, and if I got it in my mouth, I could be dead just from that.
Yeah,
it could be laced onto anything, and it's right now we see that with youth, that it's one of the biggest killers. And between the healthcare system and the drugs and mental illnesses, these are things where it's not just where you're getting taxed, that people are dying. And that's where I really have a problem. And I think when it comes to the healthcare side of things, it's not an easy solution, because the biggest problem that we had even before the pandemic is that we had a 30% shortage of healthcare workers before that. And the way that our government lapses from cycle to cycle, they're not planning 20 years ahead. So when the baby boomers got to retirement and started to flood our healthcare system and tax it and overwhelm it, we weren't even prepared. And right now we aren't prepared. And so then you add the pandemic on top of it, and we had a large portion of healthcare workers that ended up leaving. Now, my father-in-law is in the hospital right now. He had a stroke. He's waiting to get into Peace Villa. He might be a year wait. You go into the hospital, and over half the nurses are traveling nurses. Now, I think that's great that we have traveling nurses, but how economical is that, or environmentally sound is that we fly somebody from the other side of the country all the way over here to be a nurse for a short stint, and then we fly them all the way back?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. So I think the biggest thing is that, especially in the different regions, we all have different needs. One of the things that I liked about seeing local government is that all the regions are different. We all have different needs. And you pretty much have to do an audit just to see what the needs are in those regions and to be able to evaluate that. And one size doesn't fit all.
No, and part of it is attracting people, within the healthcare system. Especially we can touch on the traveling nurses is something that is been an issue for a while with not only attracting but retaining people within that industry right across the spectrum, just healthcare and just workers in general. So like when you're seeing issues like that, where do you think the ball's being dropped, and what could be done different when it comes to maybe trying to address some of those things? How do we get some of these people and workers to this region and make it attractive enough to where you've got local people getting involved in an issue being addressed because people are now flourishing within the area that you're representing? Like, how do you tackle that?
So I think the biggest thing is that those healthcare workers never should have been fired. They never should have been put on leave. If there are issues, we need to deal with the issue, and you don't just terminate a person completely, especially if they have concerns. It by the way that the really hard thing is that when those people left the system, there was a lot of really senior nurses, and up here, those senior nurses help alleviate load from doctors, and we have a shortage on doctors as well.
Yeah.
So when this pressure got put onto the system and people were stressed, the pandemic happened, they worked like crazy, and they got praised for being frontline, and then things changed.
Yeah.
And when those changed, unfortunately, a lot of the ones that were older, they just said, well, I'm done. I'm going to retire. And I think that's one of the biggest, you're not just losing one person there, you're losing a person that can back up a doctor. And it's not the same as a fresh nurse coming in, straight out of school. So when we lost those workers, that really was it was invaluable. I don't know, how do I say it? The loss that created, it made it so right now we're trying to catch up, and you see that we're trying to get more nurses created, more healthcare workers in place. We can't do it fast enough, and the ones that are getting in there, they're getting burnt out and stressed because they're getting loaded so hard. People come in, they're mad at the system. They're mad that they have to wait so long. So it's I think the biggest thing is that almost the way that things are going nowadays, our humanity is almost getting stripped from us. And the way that we should have dealt with people with respect, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Like it could have happened in such a different way that it would have been more balanced. And I think that's our biggest thing, is that when we deal with a lot of people now, is I run into so many people, they're on edge and they're mad about something. Most of the time when they come to local government, they're mad about something.
Yeah, they're not coming because you're buddies. They're coming because they're upset about something.
Yeah, and it's most of the time when I come into dealing with somebody that I've never dealt with before, I'll be completely neutral, and then I'll fish and I'll see where this person's coming from. If I try and start on one spectrum or another, it's so easy where you can just shut down conversation by offending somebody else, rather than just trying to work to fix the problem. And I think that my brain, my dad was a millwright as well, and that's all he did was fix things. And I got trained from a young age of how to fix things, but if you can't fix it one way, you find a different way.
Yeah.
And trying to look at different ways of doing things, I think is how I operate. And I think when it comes to the maneuverability of being able to do that, the Conservative Party aligns perfectly with me.
Mm. So when it comes to the Conservative Party, we're going to get into a little bit more. I think these questions are going to be a little bit more fickle, and we're going to see here how we can dance around them. So we're going to start easy. one thing now when it comes to conservatives is voter apathy is a big one. We touched on it earlier. I think part of the reason why you see like a party like BC United shifting a little bit more what they call center, but it's like center left. Now we don't really know actually where real center is because for whatever reason, conservatives, and I hate putting labels and compartmentalizing, but at the end of the day, conservatives don't really feel that the system is worth it. They're going to vote. They want to be engaged. There's a knee-jerk reaction of burn it down and replace it, even though in a lot of cases the understanding of that is just not there. But at the end of the day, also, you're dealing with people who just would much rather not even be engaged or care. They're that island of where they just want to be on their own, leave me alone on my farm. And what's it going to do? Why is there change? If I vote, it's not going to make a change. And this person doesn't really have my best interest. He's just a politician. You know, that whole, I guess, perception of things. And that's a huge voting base and percentage of the people that you're trying to represent and attract to be able to show up at the voting poll, practice not only, I think, their right, but maybe a requirement to protect democracy. Democracy does not work without engagement, public engagement. And the people that you're trying to represent the most and give a voice to are the ones who are the most disengaged, just by the nature of it. So how do you deal with something like that? You know, you're going to be attacked viciously from one end without the support from the people you're trying to actually fight for and represent.
You know, when I was a kid, my parents almost lost their house because their interest rate went to 21%. And you saw a pendulum swing back then. What happens when you look at BC United, one of the biggest flaws now is that they're not representing who they were before. They were essentially taking conservatives and merging themselves with other parties. And they were saying they were going to represent all of them in a united front in order to be able to get a majority. Well, now that front has shifted to where they're not representing any of the conservatives. And it's starting to show. It's starting to fracture. It's getting to the point where their own people are walking across the floor. That we just saw that happen, and it's Bruce Bannon. He made it. So then the Conservative Party is now an official party, and you hear when they talk on subjects, it is completely different than that other socialist side. So I think when you originally the way that they merged that party, they're no longer representing a big portion of that voting base. So if they're not going to do that, it's going to create ripple effects. And I think this is going back to that same spectrum, is that where we're getting to now, like how long we're already seeing people that aren't qualifying for their mortgages, being able to make those payments. My parents barely kept their house. When it comes to correcting the direction that we're going, the middle and the socialist side can't correct that. It's just not the way that they operate. The middle can make promises that they'll go one direction or another, but most of the time, the alignment of their party doesn't allow that. Mm-hmm. The conservatives are the ones that normally come in and clean up the mess. And that
it's only after a point of where they're directly affected on a personal level, isn't it?
And right now, one of the biggest groups that are supporting this are the ones that can't even move out of their parents' basements, or the youth. They're starting to see they don't have a future. They can't move out. They can't start a life of their own. They can't go or get married and have kids. Most of it is just too expensive. That mindset, they're getting tired of it. Mm-hmm. And those polls are starting to show the youth getting involved in that. And I really think that that's where the conservatives are going to surge again. And you see it federally as well. Like the dynamic that just, if BC United gets rid of the carbon tax on BC and the ones the federal party get rid of it on the federal side, just those carbon taxes alleviate a huge financial load that none of the other parties are offering. In fact, the NDP has come out and said that even if the federal Conservatives get in and get rid of those carbon tax, we're still going to hit the people in BC with it.
Yeah.
Which it doesn't make sense, because right now that, I can see getting charged for something if I'm getting something out of it. But right now, everything that we're paying in carbon tax, we're not getting anything. It's not stopping climate change that they're talking about. It's not helping the environment. It might subsidize a giant battery factory in Maple Ridge. Like, these huge companies are getting huge subsidies. We don't get that.
No, we're northern BC, so it's hit on a few different levels too. I mean, we're hit on the federal level because, we're west, far west, and in a province that typically aligns mostly with the federal government currently in power. And so they're definitely not willing to move too much. And then also we are northwest. So in a province that not only has a bit of a liberal flavor to it because of the southern end of it, but that's where a lot of people in this area, I also think that voting, especially on a provincial level, isn't going to make a thing, because it's not based on area or landmass. It's completely based off of population density. So the few people down in the lower mainland, that's fractured into all these different little micro environments. You've got Chinatown, you've got, a whole array of different places that call the lower mainland home, having overwhelming decisions and policy structure over things that they depend on, but affect the northern part of BC the most, where the population density is the least. Mm-hmm. But I guess there is one thing to kind of, because I don't want to lose how are you going to get the voters to come to the table part? Because that is a big deal. That voter apathy thing.
Yep.
That's strong. Like, that's a real thing.
When you look at the lower mainland and going back in the past with federal Conservatives, you see a lot of support for them in areas where the provincial have never seen. And right now, those areas where they support federal Conservatives, they can swing BC Conservatives very easy as well. Whereas before, they weren't doing that. They didn't have an option.
You think this is a paradigm shift that wasn't possible any other time until now?
I think
the Conservative BC Party is a really old party.
Yes, it was
and not many people realize that Trevor Bolin, our local Trevor Bolin, was the leader up until very recently when John Rustad became leader.
Yeah, I think there's a major need for it right now.
And that's what you think might be the difference as to why the oldest... I don't know if it's the oldest party in BC, but pretty much the oldest, and it's going to be resurrected. Yeah. It's powerful.
I really think that, right now you see the candidates coming. When I look at people that want to support me, I don't even really have to look for people are happy to jump forward and help. And these are people that all have issues, that have very many, tons of different types of issues, push them and motivate them to try and make that difference. Normally the biggest thing that makes that pendulum swing is financial. And we're getting pushed.
Yeah.
Right now we're getting pushed even more. Like just a pail of oil 4 years ago for my farm has over doubled in price. Now, when it comes to manufacturing that in other countries, do you really think it's cost that much more to produce that? I don't think so.
No.
Even if you just go across the border where we're not getting taxed like crazy, you go across the border, how much cheaper everything is. And it blows my mind as to how much just those carbon taxes hit every sector. And some sectors they hit way more. Right now, I think for us in the north, we're getting hit harder than everybody else, especially if they want us to convert to electric. Like, how does that work? That if I buy a $200,000 tractor and they want to go fully electric by 2030. They want my tractor to be that. Well, if I can't do that, are they going to start taxing me on that?
Well, yeah, they are.
Or making me pay penalties?
Yeah.
Like right now, the production cap on the oil and gas, they say they want to support LNG, but then they want to put a production cap on it, and they want to cut it by 30% of what it was in 2007. Well, in 2007, that's half of what we are right now. Well, we're not even shipping overseas yet. So it's going to easily double as soon as we start shipping overseas. Well, what happens when you don't make that cap? Oh, well, you're going to get taxed. There's another tax. Yeah, if the corporations get taxed, well, that tax is going to come down to us. The people are the ones paying. But right now, if you look at the wealth of what we have right now and what got handed down from the baby boomers, it is getting stripped away from us faster than I have ever seen, in so many different ways. And it's almost like death by 1,000 cuts in the way that they're doing it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help us. Most of the time it's big corporations that are getting helped, and a lot of it's through lobbyists. I saw that with my farm. Right now, if you go to a feedlot, and most of the time the farmers pretty much have to sell their calves to feedlots. From those feedlots, they'll go primarily to Alberta from here, and at those feedlots they'll get fed up to the point where they go to Cargill. That never used to happen going back 30 years ago. Going back 30 years ago, there used to be mom and pop slaughterhouses and butcher shops all over the province. Instead, Cargill came in, I think it was about 25 years ago, lobbied the federal government, got a whole bunch of regulations changed, so then those mom and pop shops couldn't operate anymore. They got shut down. They don't hire their own workers anymore. Now we end up having Cargill, this giant this giant company that came from the U.S., one of the biggest companies in the world. Almost all their workers they hire from out of our country. They don't pay them very well. Most of the money that the workers make, they send back home, and it doesn't stay in country.
Yeah.
And then the money that Cargill makes goes out of our country as well. Whereas before, we used to have mom and pop operations that were very versatile, that could help the farmers that were close in their areas. So that was one of the reasons why, instead of taking my animals to the auction and supporting Cargill, because Cargill pretty much sets all the prices of what goes through the stores and what they'll pay. Instead, I started getting a local slaughterhouse to slaughter my animals. And once they're inspected, then they can go to a local butcher. The money that I spend on the slaughterhouse stays local. The money that I spend on the butcher stays local. Then I end up getting my product back at the farmer's market, and I sell it direct to customer. That money stays local. Everything in that process is local to our system, and it helps our infrastructure.
So it sounds to me like, just like what you're talking about there, is that it's not only trying to stimulate a shop local mentality, it's trying to create incentives for people to be able to not only reinvest, but attract industry back within local BC, and specifically northern part of BC borders, instead of outsourcing it because of red tape and legislation restricting people and taxing them to a point where it's cheaper to import. And then in return, when you spend, employee, or really outsource at all of those resources are pretty much going external to import a cheaper product. So it's the China effect.
I really think that really? We've taken globalization to an extreme, to where a lot of outside entities control us. Canada is one of the few places in the world where we could be completely self-sustaining. We wouldn't need any other country. We could produce everything ourselves. We have most of the minerals and resources. If we actually utilize them in a sustainable way, then actually, if we do have extra product, then we can ship globally. But we need to focus on ourselves right now. During the course of the pandemic, we figured out one thing that a lot of people didn't know, was that over 90% of our drugs for our healthcare system come from out of our country, and most of them are from China and India. Mm-hmm. So if there's ever a problem overseas, what do we do about our own people?
Yeah, we're at the mercy of import, for sure.
And we actually saw that with a bunch of different types of medications over the course of the pandemic. Like, we saw empty shelves in pharmacies all over the place. Well, there's no reason that we have to have that. You know, one of the amazing things is that if we actually start investing in ourselves, when we do get into times where things are harder, we can actually control our own markets.
Yeah, and that's powerful. But there's a really tricky thing about that. Anytime something is built out, it's attacked. Climate change is an example. Fossil fuel, bad, got to shut it down. So, okay, what's the alternative? Clean energy. Well, what does that look like? Solar, wind, hydro, nuclear. Any one of those is attacked viciously as soon as it has the ability to build out and be somewhat sustainable. Electricity is an example of that in a big way, because even though it only kind of addresses one certain thing, it doesn't offset all the other contributions oil and gas has. It's intertwined into the fabric and DNA of how our lifestyle and sustainability is right now. So you take that away and you're only addressing one element like electricity. Well, that's fine, but the infrastructure isn't there, and the dependency on it is very weak. And Site C locally is a prime example of that. You've got the ability to hydroelectric is providing a need in a big way, not only immediately, but then with the foreseeable future, very short foreseeable future, and then it's attacked. You go and you clear cut land to be able to put solar out, it's attacked. You have windmills, it's attacked. So when you're dealing with all these subjects to try and, address, I think, a demand on a local end-up basis, it's almost so cumbersome because of the political stuff that you have to contend with that's just one subject.
Yeah.
So
but in order to
what do you do when you got to contend with that that's a hard thing to have to put up with, never mind locally up here as an MLA, but if you're to form government, never mind if you're not even government, you're just opposition. How do you deal with that?
When you look at Site C, one of the amazing things in I think when you look at your resources and how you capitalize on them, you need to look at what's local or regional, what works the best. In BC, we're very fortunate with our hydro. That we can place it in certain areas, and like Williston Lake, that's a big battery of water that really comes in handy. The solar and wind, they've got ups and downs. I think you have to find your balance. I think just trying to shift off of oil and gas without actually having anything that's tried, tested, and proven is I think you're not looking at the big picture of how it has to work. I don't think we can just rush really quickly to try and say, hey, we have to make this transition right now, when the biggest polluters aren't making any of those transitions. No matter what we do here, we're not going to stop China and India from putting out all that pollution.
Yeah.
And we can make it so then everything stops here, and it's not going to stop China and India. So the biggest thing that we can do is figure out what works best for us and what people can handle. So if you tax them to death and you make it so then their quality of life doesn't work, well, then we're not going to prosper very well in the future. I think when you look at oil and gas, the way that we produce it, even like Fort McMurray gets such a bad name. When you actually, they could have promoted that as the biggest reclamation project on the planet.
Yeah, I know.
Because in that area, there's a lot that wouldn't grow. And what they're taking out, which is sitting right on the top, right on the soil, like right on top, they can just scoop it up and they can process it. When they're done, things grow afterwards.
Yeah, it could have been definitely the biggest cleanup in history.
So when you look at how things are labeled and you say, "Oh, hydro is totally clean," well, have you looked at how it was created? Have you looked at the amount of agricultural land that's now disappeared when they flood that? That they're not putting a value on that. That's some of the best agricultural land that we've got. So do you value food sustainability? That's one thing that's not really getting promoted. Another side of it is that there's no electric haul trucks or shovels that are operating on that site primarily. It's not clean, so there's a lot of pollution that goes into making that infrastructure that afterwards they turn around and say it's a totally clean project. Well, it wasn't. When it comes to wind projects, the amount of money and chemicals that have to get put into making those windmills, and the fact that they're not easily recycled afterwards, and that they only have they don't have that long of a lifespan. The concrete that they're mounted on, that all has an economical footprint. Concrete uses a lot of power to make it. It's not that clean. So you can turn around and promote it one way. That doesn't mean that it's actually the best way to do it.
No, it seems like it's a little bit of there's a lot of it's like manipulated. There's I think a lot more to it than what meets the eye, and that's I think just public awareness and education. A lot of it has to do with that. So how are you going to approach that? So let's get into something a little stickier here.
Sure.
Can I ask, because this is I think tying in on where you stood your ground yourself when it came to PRD, and I think you know where this is going, but this is a very important subject and a difficult one to navigate through, because you were the only one to vote against the Treaty 8 land sharing agreement, and this is something that's going to I think come up a lot more often, where I think at the forefront is something that this is going to be part of a conversation more and more. The shift is huge. And it's going to be something you're going to have to contend with intimately. I mean, there's how many First Nations presentation up here and representation, and how do you make sure that things are being addressed healthily, properly, in a way that's going to have positive outcomes. So that is an example of, I think, one of the things that you encountered, I think, even on a regional end of things with the Treaty 8 land sharing agreement. How do you go about making sure you address that in a way that's going to be dealt without it just unraveling in a bad direction? It's done in the best, healthiest way. It's a tough one to address because we're already at a point of where you're dealing with a balloon bouncing around ready to pop. And so nobody wants to hold on to it long enough to be able to actually deal with it.
Did it unravel in a bad direction?
Well, I don't know. You tell me. Actually, I'd like to play a video of you and some of the concerns you had at the PRD when it was being presented, and then you can kind of comment on it, and then we can talk about how it actually followed through and bring some
comments, questions. Jordan.
So to be completely honest, if you phrase it all in, I absolutely don't allow anybody to hunt on my property. I've had people come in my driveway drunk, wanting to hunt. I've had people scope my wife from the road while she's walking a dairy cow, thinking that it's a moose. A lot of people in my region have had similar instances that stigma on the hunting side, that there's a reason why hunting's just completely banned. Like farmers really don't want it on their property in some cases. Trying to get around that might be difficult. My other suggestion that I see a chunk of private land there, but what's happened with all of that crown land? Like BC has so much. Why not just open that up to them?
Yeah, so that absolutely is available to them, Jordan, in terms of having that access to this. This is about that partnership and relationship. You know, about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a landowner, producer north of the river out in, I think around Doe River or there, Len Donaldson. And Len worked that land for 30 or 40 years, and every spring as he was working the land, he was digging up artifacts. And he probably acquired, I bet you 60 or 80 boxes, like shoebox size of historical artifacts, arrowheads, scraping tools, and turned them over to Treaty 8, who went to SFU. And so I think there's still that aspect that there's a lot of the land that's privately held today that has some of that sacred piece, and it's voluntary. When we talk about all in, it's voluntary, and so nobody accesses the private land without the permission of the landowner. But if there is the opportunity to forge that partnership voluntarily by a landowner, for somebody who wants to come on for ceremonial purposes or for gathering medicine and things, that's another piece to it as well, right? But it's completely voluntary, and that land is posted where you don't come on without the respect of the land and the contact to the landowner giving you the permission. They just don't go walking on, right?
I was just, to clarify, I was just pointing that out and referencing that all in regards to hunting that may make it difficult to allow the other side of that as well.
Sure. Right. Good point. Thank you.
Dr. Hebert?
Yeah, thanks, Dale. And
so we can continue that. This, just for reference, is on their website, the PRD website, and I'll put a link in this so people don't have to go searching for it in the show notes. And I encourage a lot of people who have been listening up until now to watch that link, because there's quite a bit in there. Because you asked a few good questions, and then the whole part of, I guess, the response was the voluntary, and you can keep going into it as to how is that any different than how things were dealt with now as far as hunting efficacy and hunting on private land and, all those different options. But the result of that, though, was met with a very strong backlash and nuance in there, where the PRD held a meeting at the Pomeroy that was, met with so much public interest that they had to rebook it at the, was it the curling rink? I think it was, or not the curling, the arena. And you were the only one to have voted at that time against it because of caution. And then it was later where the PRD had a letter that they had drafted that was not in favor, and they wanted more information, and that kind of touched on a few elements with, the insurance and liability to private landowners and some other items. Now, that's a subject that is worth addressing because it's very important to address, but how do you deal with it in a way that you're addressing it in a healthy way, where the outcome is to try and bring people together and manage it in a way where it doesn't get explosive? Right. I mean, this is something that you're not going to be able to dodge at all. It's got headstrong, and this is something that's near and dear to a lot of different people. And depending on what perspective you're looking at it, how do you navigate through that? So I guess I'm leading and laying all of that out to where would there be clarification with this one in particular, because this will come up, I think, a few times. And then also moving forward, especially when you're in a position like, let's say now an MLA, where this is something that you're going to be contending with in a lot more of a in-depth manner. So to go back, at the beginning, what about this one? What records need to be straightened? What information, like what enlightenment, like what's the explanation, not explanation, but what's the layout of what happened here?
The tough one is that I wasn't actually picking sides on that. I actually wanted people in my area to get along. and to not see that scenario that happened at the Pomeroy. That was one of the meetings that I expressed concerns, and I offered suggestions of how it might work better and perform more smoothly, just from my own experience sharing land. And it's such an intimate subject of who you're letting onto your property, what they want to do, and how. And if somebody just says all in, you just kind of smother that. It makes it difficult for it to work. And I actually did offer different suggestions to try and make it work. And I got outvoted 3-1. And then I got outvoted the next 3-1. And then at the board, I got outvoted 11-1. And the tough thing, about, like, especially with Area B, the size that it is, the amount of different people there, and First Nations that are there, I want everybody to get along. I have friends that are status. I have friends that are First Nations. I want for everybody to get along. There's no reason why we couldn't. It's just certain scenarios you have to handle them differently. And that one there, it was a tough one that he was using Saskatchewan as an example. And I don't think you can just do one blanket thing to make it work. And in Saskatchewan, it was partnered with provincial. It wasn't partnered with local government. So at part of that, one of the comments that I made too is that I said, I think this is out of our wheelhouse, that we shouldn't be dealing with it. That you need to deal with locals and talk to them about what they want. And if it is a scenario where you could get the provincial government to look at it, it's a possibility. The tough one is that I had at the board, when they voted 11-1, and they offered Dale Bumstead a support letter for that, I had so many phone calls of people that were mad, wondering why local government was involved in this at all. That has land rights when it comes to stuff like that, that's on the provincial realm of things, and or even federal too. Why this was happening. And I said, go back, look at the videos. You can see it all online. I don't even have to tell them stories. Like, I don't even have to tell them what happened. I said, go watch the videos. You can see everything that happened. Yeah. There was a lot of people that did that. There was a thing on Facebook that went around and said that it was mandatory and that it wasn't voluntary, and that was wrong. That Dale Bumstead said it was voluntary. He also didn't have an actual structure in place to say that it was anything, because it wasn't in place. There was nothing actually that was developed, that if somebody wanted to turn around and say, I want to sign up for it right now, there was nothing to sign on to. So it was just a concept. And the tough thing is that when that Facebook post said that it was mandatory that farmers would have to do this, it blew up. And I think in the one day, I probably got over 100 phone calls about what was going on with it. And it was the same thing over and over, like trying to tell people, go and look at the information. You can see the presentation that Dale's doing. And correct that we were told that it was voluntary, that it wasn't our presentation, that we didn't actually want to do that. It wasn't one of our reports or initiatives. So when it came to that meeting, then, a lot of people showed up to that meeting. A lot of people. I think that was probably one of the biggest gatherings that's ever come to.
It was huge. And even to bring it up now, kudos to you. I have to say the strength and the ability to navigate through this is nothing but a testament of courage, because a lot of people would run and hide. And it has to be addressed, in a way where you navigate it the best way you know how. And unfortunately, I'm not too sure any one person knows what that looks like. And so that opens people up to criticism and nitpicking in ways that could have lasting effects. Yeah. But at the end of the day, you have to address it, and you have to not dance around it. But it has to be done in a way where you've got the respect and the ability to be able to navigate through it and explain your position in a way that is accurate to the point of view you have, while addressing, I think, some of the nuance that is deep-rooted and complicated. That's a tall order to ask about any one individual. And so when I bring this up, it's because not only is it an opportunity to be able to put some perspective and clarity on the situation, it's not in a way, in any shape or form, as a design of attack or vulnerability. That I want to try and make sure that's clear.
Yeah.
It's just, I think this is something to address not only for past clarity, but then also looking at where this has got to be addressed moving forward in a way that's going to have, I think, healthy, lasting effects.
Yeah.
Because to ignore it is not an option. It's just not an option. And as a position of MLA, I feel in some cases it's being ignored or mishandled in some ways. And then how do you deal with it properly, and what does that look like moving forward? And I think it takes more than just one person to be able to give that answer, but I think it also is something that would be only poignant, and I think worth talking about when it comes to, if you're elected, you must have had, I think, some thought as to, okay, how are you going to manage this? This is more unique, I think, in this area than it is, in a lot of other areas within BC, because of the size that we're dealing with and how many First Nations and a lot of the nuance that we're dealing with real time in this specific area.
Yeah. And I think it's a tough thing when you sit on a board like that, you have different perspectives, like the 8 municipal directors that are on there. It's not them being asked to volunteer their backyards. There's certain areas that would get affected by this one thing. So to try and, when I said that, like, this is going to have issues in area B, or it could have issues in another area. The tough thing that when you're sitting on that board is that it's the whole region that makes that decision. It's not the board. Mm-hmm. So it's a difficult thing, because we want to make things work. We want to help First Nations. But we have to find the right process to implement things. You can't just slam them in. And when people showed up to that meeting, there were some people that were really, really mad. There were some people that were just standing there to hear about it. There were other people that were in support of it. There's a lot of different perspectives. When the fire code got exceeded, that's where we had to get people to leave. And then once people left, like, I had to actually yell and ask people to leave.
This was the first meeting that was at the Pomeroy you're talking about.
Yeah. Once they left, then we were able to resume our meeting, and I brought up about the support letter, and the board was able to have a discussion, and then the board voted on it and withdrew their support. So it's the dynamics of getting, like, being completely new to politics and having something like that happen, like that was very overwhelming.
But that is speaking to what can happen if you're the only one to vote against a thing, because I know you took some heat on that. And there was some pressure and publicity that was a result of that. But I think it was with the intentions of having better clarification as to what they're trying to present, I think. Or
I'm like a Neanderthal when it comes to social media.
Yeah.
And I got accused of spreading the Facebook post, and I didn't even have Facebook. I didn't have Twitter, nothing. And I got accused of spreading that misinformation. And I said everything that I had to say, I said it at the board table.
Yeah.
I didn't hold back. I said exactly what my opinions were, and then I also said the opinions of what my constituents want me to say as well. Now, if I had constituents that turned around and said that they thought this was great, then I'd say this part, that one person thought this part worked really well. Maybe we'll try and make this work. But it just seemed like the whole thing just tried to get rammed through, and it didn't work.
No.
And it really is. And it now in my area, it is tough because I have such a diversity to my constituents currently. And right now, the provincial role that I'm running for, my area is a big chunk of that.
Yeah,
it really is encompassing. So when it comes to knowing that area, I know it pretty well as well. Like it's one of those things where the First Nations live right up the road from me. I'm not moving. Like whatever, some people can go in there and vote on something, and once they're out as a director, they don't have to deal with it. Well, I still live there. I want it to work. So when you try and bring something in, like when I tell people that there are things that maybe you should look at, like I'm just one person voting there. And even though I really doubted myself as well as to whether or not, like, should I be, like, was I wrong to be the only one vote against this? But then I heard a lot of other people that had some concerns as well. And the concerns, it's one of those things where if that consultation isn't really there and you just ram something in, like one of the things that a lot of farmers weren't happy about was that a lot of farmers up here rely on dugouts, and they've got dugouts all over their property for their livestock, and they use them in different ways. The provincial government turned around and said, we want to put water licenses on the water in those dugouts, and we want you to register them, and it'll be free. And then the next year it's like, oh, well, we're going to charge you now, and we want to know how many animals are on there, what type of animals, and they just change their mind. It's not what they originally started with. So there's a lot of farmers that when it comes to how they've done things up here, it just keeps on getting eroded. And I think that's where it created the mistrust with them. Yeah. And I think, me personally, like, I've seen that as well. Like, I don't trust everything. Like, I look and I analyze things. If you ask me if I trust this government, no, I don't. If I get into government and I said, oh, just trust me, I don't want a person just to give blind faith. Like, I still want them to look at what we're doing. I want them to analyze. Like, that's kind of the reason why we're in the scenario that we're in. I don't want to be here. Yep. I would rather be at home on my farm with my family and do that. That's where I'd be happier. Except right now, we see this. Me personally, I see it as just a big mess, and it really is that the way that things are getting dealt with is a blanket mindset that one size fits all. And unfortunately, there is this tiny little portion down in the bottom of our province that they think the world revolves around them. Yeah. And when they come up with things, that a lot of the time it doesn't work with other regions, and it's very difficult to deal with that. And I that's one of the things that I want to try and be a voice for our region and fight for what we need.
I'd like to wrap that up, and then we're going to take a break, and then we can come back. But when it comes to that specific area, is there anything that you would like to clarify maybe on the record that would be a record needing to be put straight when it came to that specifically? Because I know there was quite a bit there. And I know it's hard to try and give an explanation, because the opportunity doesn't present itself, especially in a way where you can actually kind of say, okay, this is actually the truth without any manipulation. So when it came to that, is there anything that needs to be addressed about the misunderstandings on one thing or another?
I think the biggest misunderstanding is that on one side of it, there was a push to do one thing. And then on the other side, I voted all by myself. Yeah. But then I was doing that because my constituents wanted me to. Trying to do that, like going against the peer pressure of the other directors at that table, that's not something that I want to deal with. I'm brand new to it. It's not something I don't want to have backlash on me, but I also said that I do what my constituents want me to do. And the majority of the constituents wanted me to say those things. So I said them. And I voted on it. So at that board meeting where it got voted in favor to support it, there was 11 directors that wanted to help support First Nations and do this concept. And it was a voluntary concept that's all in. And then there was me all by myself, and there was a lot of farmers that had questions about this or concerns about this, or maybe it could be done a different way. And it didn't get listened to. And then it blew up like that. So I think the only thing, I don't want to see that happen again.
How do you stop that? How do you stop that from happening?
I think
again?
You have to.
How do you manage that? Because you know what? Like, the thing with that is that there were so many questions, and from what I'm seeing here, from like the seat I'm sitting in, is that there were a lot of questions. There was a lot of questions that were trying to address concerns that were, well, that's not what it's all about, with no real explanation to put that question to bed. This is actually what it's all about. And the public consultation part, I think, was an afterthought in a way, where if the board and the regional government doesn't have an understanding of anything, even though this was the third time that it was presented. And then
that one that you played was the second time, I think.
The second time.
Yeah.
But they don't even have enough of an outline or a structure on what that actually entails for you to be able to decide one way or the other, when the public has no idea about what's going on. And questions need to be addressed before there is a vote in support or against it, as far as my understanding with what that looks like. So it's a lot of unknowns. And I think the biggest thing that was misleading was the fact that landowners didn't have much of a say. And you asked that was, by addressing it, is this all in? And that's what I heard at those two meetings was, that this is unacceptable because it's going to affect insurance and liability and the ability to say yes or no in one form or another. But it's interesting to be able to look forward in future. Like Joffrey Park is an example where they shut the whole area down because of, heritage rights and title. And so that's where a lot of people thought that they might be in a position eventually, if the groundwork is laid out, to where that's going to be changed down the road to where landowners didn't have a say because of titleship and rights that superseded ownership.
I think with this is that this is what happens at a board. So you can have different opinions. Our PRD board, there's 8 seats that are municipal and 4 rural. So the 4 rural have more of an understanding of the impact on this. The 8 municipal, they may not know a lot of the concerns that I was bringing up, or may not understand them. Mm-hmm. The difference between that board and MLA are substantially different. Trying to work on a board like that, like not all regional boards are 8 municipal and 4 rural. Some of them are half and half. And you get different perspectives. I think, with First Nations going forward, they're right when it comes to treaties, and the government needs to figure things out. Like in the past, a lot of what happened here, when you look with the British, the French, some Spanish, when they originally came over, there were a lot of damages done. Like I didn't live back then, but just when you look throughout history of how things worked, there were a lot of resources that were taken without proper procedures being put in place, or if treaties were put in place that they weren't adhered to. Now, when you start we've seen a big emphasis on working with that and working with First Nations and trying to correct some of those things that are wrong, and you see it in the TLE agreements. When you go into that correction period, you still want to make sure that other landowners are consulted as well. And I think that maybe when it came, this might have been a bottleneck. I'm not sure of when it came to the TL agreements on previous things, but there's a lot of stuff happening behind enclosed meetings that people don't know about, and it creates insecurities. And I think the transparency and consultation with everybody, I think that that has to happen. If it doesn't, then you have tensions build like that, and it doesn't work out good. Like that meeting was not productive when that many people showed up, and how it went. That is not what I wanted. That's not what
it's not what you're wanting, but it's, I think, a large part because nobody has a real understanding, and the transparency and the way things are rolled out.
Yeah.
It's piss poor. Like, that's the honest reality of it. Like, that's the biggest thing is people don't have they'll ask questions. And that is one thing about government in particular that, I think most people are frustrated with, is that when there's a question or something needing elaboration or better understanding, it's sidestepped with nonsensical general response. There is no better understanding at the end of a response to a question.
Yeah.
It's just a sidestep. It's people talking out the side of their face. And that's the frustrating part about it, is that now the result in that is nobody wanting to say, okay, no, this isn't going to go any further until there's better consultation, there's better understanding. And these questions that are really well-founded and I think reasonable aren't explained and understood in a way where a sound decision could be made moving forward. That's a big deal. That's a huge part of, I think, why we are right now, is that the nonsensical general approach on just about everything is allowed and is put up, and people are getting frustrated with that.
I think ultimately on that scenario, when it first got brought to the PRD board, I think a lot of the other directors would agree as well, is that it should have just got received for information for people to know about the program. And then they could work on whether or not people would be interested in it. And then the local government is naturally having a perspective on something that isn't part of their jurisdiction. Because and I honestly, like, when it comes to my own land, and if I'm sharing it, I don't want the government involved. I'd rather know the person that I'm sharing it with. If they want to go for a deer or whatever, I can take them out there and I can show them. I don't want a really complicated program to have to sign up for, but that's my personal opinion. There's some people that don't want land sharing at all, and that's their choice. If it's their land, then they can decide that. But I think that main thing was that the PRD shouldn't have been in that scenario in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can put that to rest. The biggest thing I wanted to get out of that was just kind of showing that when there is a question of clarity in a moment, being the only one to make that vote and not going with the crowd speaks to, I think, the character. It's not something that should be attacked, because if you do that, then more and more people are going to just say to hell with it. They're going to go blindly in one direction without having a full understanding. And I think that was, a testament as to where there's definitely better approaches and ways about going about something, not on your end, but the fact that you were put in that position is unfair. That wasn't right. The fact that whole thing happened was, I think, because of improper rollout from an idea to government and how it was all done. And that's where there is a lot of change. And at least we have somebody that was involved that was able to say, wait a minute, let's put a moment of pause on this and just try and figure out clarity. Some of the questions that you asked. And anybody who wants to know a little bit more about it, I will state that link will be in the show notes. But it's something I'd like to say thank you for doing that, for actually asking those questions and voting the way you did. It wasn't to challenge it from a vindictive or malicious point of view. I look at it as a point of view where there should have been a little bit more information brought to the table, so that people can form an opinion from a knowledgeable perspective.
Yeah. And even after that, that one where everybody showed up at the Pomeroy, I really didn't want to go back onto Facebook, but I went back onto Facebook just to be able to actually, there's so many people that don't know how to access the video footage of those meetings or how to look at agendas. When I went onto Facebook, I was trying to show that some people were expressing a view on one side of things and others were on the other side. But when I did the Facebook thing, it was just to try and show the transparency of what we had and what we saw, and why I voted a certain way. That I wasn't trying to, my biggest thing is I actually really like how everything is videotaped. Yeah. Because I can actually tell people, I'm like, go to this video, look at like the 30-second minute, and you can see exactly what we're talking about. It's not me creating misinformation in any way. Like, that's actually the last thing I want is for misinformation and confusion to be spread. And I'll just leave it with that, is that I still don't like Facebook.
Okay, well, let's pause this, and then when we come back, we're going to hit up a different question. While we're back, I can actually think clearly now. Man, this
perfect.
A clean start all over again.
Yeah.
This is, well, we're back. This is going to be part 2. Well, we were talking about the land sharing, and that's a topic that I definitely think we can probably do a whole podcast on with yourself or somebody, and I'd like to dig deeper into it. But moving forward, I think on more of the provincial end of things, as far as election with you running as an MLA, the role in the provincial, I guess, requirements that entails. It's weird how the same topics when I was a kid, when I remember politics being talked about, are the exact same things that we're talking about nowadays. Education, healthcare, all these schooling and everything else that we're talking about, still a thing now, and it's actually increasingly more important. We've got issues in the schooling system and our healthcare that probably could warrant, I think, a podcast all on its own on each individual subject. But now as MLA, it's kind of falling underneath your umbrella because you're into the provincial end of things. Yep. We touched on the healthcare a little bit earlier, and even not so much the education part. But before we get into education, there was one thing I wanted to wrap up a little bit and get some clarification on, because I think this touches on everybody on a personal level when it comes to provincial support and reinstatement with healthcare workers because of the pandemic. The pandemic is a whether you like it or not, and you're for how things were carried out or against it, is irregardless. It's something that's going to be burnt into everybody's memory. It's a marker. It's a time marker in history. And we're suffering repercussions because of how it was handled, whether positive or negative. And it looks like it's a lot more negative than positive. So when it comes to, how did that affect you? Like, you're now into politics and it was a marker. How did that come across into something that maybe got you involved or in a position where you wanted to be able to make a stand in one form or another? What's your take on it, and what would you like to see implemented moving forward? And if it was you that was in a position in that point in time, how would you have liked to have kind of dealt with it? And that's a multifaceted question, but I think it still kind of falls underneath the main objective of trying to get a little bit of a perspective as to where you stand on things.
I think when they chose to do the mandate, it was like using a club on something that requires a pair of tweezers. If you look at the scenario now with what happens, if you minus, say, 6,000 healthcare workers, or I don't know the exact number, that were no longer there because of that, if you subtract that and the adverse effects of not having those healthcare workers in comparison to now, I think we probably did way more damage getting rid of those healthcare workers than dealing with it in the first place. Because in the first year that we had the pandemic, those same people were praised for being there and doing great work.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, they get villainized for something that they had questions about. And instead of answering questions or trying to find different solutions, like everything that I'm talking about, I've been saying, finding different solutions over and over and over. Because you can't just make one thing work for everything. And none of that happened. So now we have a healthcare system where we don't have the people. Like, at Fort St. John, we have an amazing hospital. It's not that old. In Dawson, we've got a brand new regional hospital getting built. We have these facilities, but we can't even staff them. We can't even come close to staffing them.
Yeah.
So the problem isn't the facilities. Yeah. The problem is with having the people, and I think it was a big mistake to look at it with that club and to just force something like that to happen, and it created such a division. And I don't think it had to happen that way. The reason that I got into politics and the reason that I left the farm and my mechanic job, I was completely happy doing that. A year and a half ago, my dad, he's immunocompromised, and he's been that way for 10 years, and he gets immunoglobulin shots.
What?
Immunoglobulin shots. So it was what they give him a shot to help boost his immune system.
Oh, okay.
So it's a very unique scenario. It's one of the things where there wasn't a lot of testing in place for certain things that were getting applied. And I can't tell you the exact correlation, but he got his Moderna booster, and 3 days later he was in severe pain. And he was in so much pain that by the time it got to 1 week, he was on morphine and fentanyl.
Oh.
He was in that much pain, and they did scans on him, and they said, "Oh, we need somebody to look at these scans." And my dad actually, even though he was immunocompromised, he was in really good shape, did mile-long walks. He ran the Meals on Wheels program for White Rock. He was in good shape, and it was really surprising what happened. I went down to visit him, and he was in pain. There wasn't really much I could do, and he got they were still working on pain medication of what to try and help, and then they were still waiting on scans. So I came back home, and I think this is February, and he just got worse, and the pain was all over. It was primarily in his lower back. And then when it sounded like it was getting really bad, I'm like, okay, well, I've got to go down and see him. I never thought I'd be in a scenario where the whole pandemic, I stayed on my farm. I was a mechanic. I didn't really deal with anybody. I didn't get vaccinated. I was on my farm. I was happy doing that. I didn't even think about it. It wasn't even a priority for me. Like I didn't see a need for it. I was young. Even if I did get sick, I figured I'd just stay on the farm and not get anybody else sick. Like that was the best way to protect people, was not deal with anybody.
Well, hey, that was a isolation quarantine. You were on your property.
So when I heard about my dad, I drove down as soon as I could, and it was a 19-hour drive, and of course it was like the worst weather in the pass possible. And when I got there, I missed him by 5 hours. And that he had to take.
Wait a minute.
He had to take an ambulance to the hospital because his pain had gotten worse. So when I got down there, once he was in the hospital, I wasn't allowed in the hospital. It's a tough one that I was down there for a bit. I could do COVID tests and I wasn't sick. I offered to get the shot, and
have we talked about this in depth at all before?
Not very often. So I was told that even if I got the shot, I'd have to wait 2 weeks. Within 3 days of being down there, my dad finally saw the oncologist about his scan, and it took a month and a half for him to even see an oncologist. And that was even in Surrey Memorial, which is like you'd think they'd have all the resources, but it took a month and a half to be able to see an oncologist. He had 4 different types of cancer, all stage 4.
Whoa. Wow.
So at that point there, you get told you can't see your dad. He's in that scenario where they managed to get him they got him to the window of the hospital 5 stories up, and I was stuck in the parking lot. Couldn't see my dad. He was in so much pain. They couldn't manage the pain. That it got to the point where my mom and my dad chose mate.
Wow.
Even at that point, I saw my dad by over the phone.
Like a Zoom or FaceTime.
I still couldn't see my dad. And you know, if you want to talk about removing humanity and stripping it away from us, like I even looked into buying a hazmat suit, and that wasn't good enough for them. It's probably because they think it would cause a panic if I walked in there with a hazmat suit.
Yeah.
But at that point, I realized how broken a system is. The fact that just being on a farm and not actually needing to go and get something, yet you're going to get persecuted to that level where you can't even see a family member. Yeah. And it's something that I think it strips something away from me. And right now it's either that or it showed me how badly broken that system is. And it's not the healthcare workers, it's not the hospital. It was the procedure and protocols and the politicizing of everything. So it's after that my dad was gone. It's not an easy thing to go through. He was 74. He was in really good shape before that. Even, after 2 months, I was trying to look at something where I could try and make a difference. And then I heard about the local election, and Karen Goodings was retiring. And I thought, well, hey, I don't want things in my area to change. I like the way that they are. Like I could actually do something to make a difference. Like I'm putting money where my mouth is. It wasn't something that financially benefited me, but I'm now after seeing the local system, and I was trying to help things in that. Now I look at the provincial, and if I can look at our healthcare system and make it so then the humanity is still there, that we're not just offering MAID to people with mental illnesses.
Yeah.
Because they're not even cognitive of what they might not even be able to choose it properly. Whether or not it got used on my dad, that was his decision and my mom's decision to support that. But I think there's a lot of things where the humanity that we have and how we look at things is getting ignored. And the trying to do things so then they work properly, even though they may take more time or it may be harder to make that balance work. I think it's something that we have to do to actually make it work.
Yeah.
I think with our healthcare system in the north, I think if we do, I think there's a lot of regions where we need to do proper audits just to see where the shortfalls are, because all the regions are different. Completely different scenarios. You know, in the end there with my dad, that was when he decided to choose that, he was on 4 different heavy painkillers. And they couldn't balance his pain. So I understand that in scenarios it might be a good thing. But in a lot of other scenarios, I think, especially in the one where if it's a veteran that doesn't have resources or money to buy food, in no way should he ever be offered MAID. Or if it's ever seniors that don't have the resources, I think we should always be looking at providing the resources that people need before something like MAID gets offered to them in the healthcare system. I think one of the biggest things that we can do to help our healthcare system right now is actually get the drugs and poison off the street. People may not clue in as to the adverse effects of what happens when somebody overdoses, that most of the time you're incorporating an ambulance or a firefighter or another healthcare worker, and then a trip to the hospital. All these extra things off of a possible overdose, it taxes our system. And that we're seeing this a lot more than we ever have. And just that alone, it puts an extra load on our medical system.
Well, it seems like on just about every matrix and level that you could think of, the solution is far more damaging than the problem that they're trying to address. And why is that? It seems like it's not only cumbersome, but it's very, very destructive. And that's, I think, why there's a lot of people that think that there's apprehension when it comes to government, is that bigger government isn't the solution. It's just that much more destructive. And you need to have different approaches, like you were talking about earlier, to be able to have these problems dealt with in a way where not only do you have a lasting positive effect, but in a way where it's easy to manage. And the club over and knee-jerk reaction over all of these approaches is destructive in the end result, and it has been since the beginning of politics. It doesn't seem like there's any kind of real solution to anything without it being a disconnected decision and matrix that's rolled out in a knee-jerk reaction because of whatever policy or, I guess, moral position that they're trying to have at that time. And that's where politics and personal impact start to separate. You know what I mean? They're trying to be, okay, well, this is how we're going to roll it out with the intentions of, and it's very messy. And it has a very messy outcome at the end of it all. And I think the only silver lining that comes out of something like this is that people start to realize that when times are really damn good, you know, and we're able to enjoy it, that's typically when you disengage. And democracy only works when people are engaged. And when things start to get messy, it catches the attention of a lot of people. And with COVID, I think a lot of things were really starting to go off the track up to that point. It's just nobody really gave it much thought until that pandemic happened. And I think it caught a lot of people's attention because we're impacted directly, like on a personal level. And the outcome is where, you know, you're getting involved into politics. I got involved into podcasting. People are getting involved in democracy and paying attention. It's messy now a little bit at the beginning with how, you know, some people are reacting because they just don't know what their options are. And so it looks like it could be another contribution to polarizing response, right? Whether it be people saying burn it down and whatever, or protests or whatever, you know, people are reacting to right now, completely disengaging. But I think the way out of it is to get in behind people like yourself that are putting their life on hold, really, and getting involved in a way for positive change. And without supporting the people and rallying behind people like yourself, and supporting them when they're standing up against, you know, things that need to be questioned, like what we've already outlined earlier with, you know, whether it's, you know, PRD or any of these subjects. I don't think it's with the intentions of attacking anything. It's just better for clarification. And there needs to be more support around people like yourself who are willing to actually say, okay, enough is enough and we got to figure out a better way. Maybe not having the actual answer to it all, because I think the answer usually shifts as you approach and you go through it all.
I think the willingness to try and look for answers is where you start.
Yeah.
And it's once you look for that, I'm not saying I have all the answers. I'm saying that I am motivated to find the solutions. And when it comes to motivation, I don't think many people can beat mine right now.
No, that's true.
I'm not in this for money or power or stature. I'm in this because I'm not the only person that's gone through something like that. That it's happening over and over, and right now it's happening for other scenarios.
It's silently common.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is. It's so unfortunate that it is, but I don't think there's just an easy solution, but we've got to start with trying to look at it in a different way, rather than just trying to do the same thing over and over. Right now, if hardcore drugs, legalizing them doesn't work, or if it's volatile to parks or around schools, maybe we need to reassess that. Maybe that wasn't the right approach. Maybe we don't bring those hardcore drugs in that we didn't see 30 years ago. Like we didn't see a 13-year-old getting fentanyl gummies, or gummies that are laced with fentanyl.
Yeah.
It's and the tough thing is that when you let drugs like this happen, even though the government wants to control most of it and tax it, or the pharmaceutical companies want to be able to do that, the ripple effect through the regular people and with crime, it still stays flourishing. Like they turned around and said, oh, well, if you legalize it, it'll get rid of crime. Well, right now we've still got tons of crime related to it, but we've got way more people dying.
Yeah, that's true.
And there is evidence that shows that. So if we bring in something that allows more crime to flourish as well, we're seeing homes getting shot at. We're hearing more and more incidences We're even seeing 3D printed guns up here now. This never happened.
3D printed guns.
Yeah. Yeah. The crazy thing about 3D printed guns is that they're not even considered a gun until you're used in a criminal act.
What?
Yeah.
That's true? That's a thing?
Yep. That actually got presented. That got presented. I'm pretty sure it was by the corporal of the Dawson detachment when he did a presentation to the PRD. And I asked him about it, and he actually said that. So if you find somebody and they've got a 3D printed gun, that's not considered a weapon until it's actually used in that manner.
Wow.
So our system's got some major flaws when things.
That's the rationale that is being carried out.
So I really think that we need to reassess and work at supporting police and our firefighters and our paramedics when it comes to getting rid of those drugs, and at least making it a lot harder for them to come into our country or for them to get produced here. Then when you look at doing treatment, I think if the safe injection site that we see in Fort St. John that's getting put in, the city doesn't even have a choice over where it goes. That's just getting slammed into place. There's consultation that's there, but it's just lip service.
Yeah, it is. We've both been to some of these meetings, and I think some of the frustration that I've seen coming out of something like this is that there's a few people asking questions, and it's landing on the laps of people who are able to voice, I guess, it's being done with the best intentions without any knowledge or proof to be able to support it. And the longevity of it and how it's going to be implemented isn't being documented in a way that's going to have the nimbleness to be able to adapt in a unique way, even though they say that it's being done on a case-by-case basis. There's no past learnings from the last 10 plus years of it being rolled out in other areas. There's
only one other country.
There's no clarification as to who's being affected and how it's being rolled out. If anything, the more that's being explained, it creates more questions that are even more alarming.
Yeah.
And it's wrapping up youth, and this is where it gets into a point where, we need to say, okay, at what point is this going to end up getting to where people need to actually stand up and say, okay, we need different answers. When you start affecting youth, it's another level. Like you can't be doing this willy-nilly. And I can't believe that something that's on this level of adult professionalism is being allowed to be able to rolled out on the scale it is without better proof of analysis and understanding. To force it that's wrong.
And the tough thing too is that the first stage that they should be looking at is the treatment, not just supply or safe supply. They need to look at trying to help the people get off of these drugs and become successful members of society again. The first thing that you have to do is help with the treatment, figure out why they got on them in the first place. So there's addictions of so many different types. What causes that addiction, whether it's previous trauma or maybe it's a mental illness, you have to figure out what got these people to turn to that in the first place.
They're talking about that underneath. That's what they mean by wraparound service, is that they're trying to address it on a case-by-case basis, but there's no wraparound service.
No, and that treatment and wraparound is the main thing you should be doing.
Yeah.
Once you've invested that amount of time in helping the person get better, when they get out, you don't want them to get out to all of those drugs being available to them again. Because if something stresses them or whatever caused them to do it in the first place, they're going to turn to those drugs again. And you have to make it so those drugs, they can't get to them as easy. And you have support services, but that's where we have to go, is an actual treatment basis. And we don't have that.
No.
And it's and every time a naloxone kit's used, like, that costs money. The resources go through our healthcare system. It just makes it so then it really makes it so then our system doesn't work as good at all. Like, we really would have been better if we had kept them criminalized and just invested the money into our policing to fight. Like, you hear about a couple of the busts that they made of fentanyl coming across the Mexico border into the U.S. There was one, I think it was a bust on carfentanil. It was enough to kill. It sounds ludicrous, but it was something like 100 million people.
Really?
Yeah, like the amount, it's almost like drug warfare. The amount of drugs that are coming in from other countries, especially into the U.S., they're seeing huge amounts from Mexico into the U.S. And then in Canada, we're just allowing it to happen in BC. So whether or not we're actually allowing a private company to produce hardcore drugs, or whether or not they're getting produced by criminals, like it from what it sounds like, it doesn't take much to actually produce a bunch of these drugs.
No.
We need to be fighting that, because when you look back to when this just puts it in perspective. When I talk to some people, especially when we were teenagers, and you go to a party and you're able to drink. The main thing about the exposure to that is that you look out for your friends so that they're not drinking and driving. And as long as you're not too extreme, the worst case scenario that you have is a hangover the next day. Nowadays, you have 13-year-olds that grab a bag of candies, and 3 of them could overdose with fentanyl and they could just be dead. Like, there's no next day. The extreme, like, technically alcohol is a poison. You can take it in certain quantities. All of these hardcore drugs are poison as well, except to a very severe manner. And it's a severity that it just takes one time and you're dead. And you hear over and over of kids dying. And these are people that, like, imagine what they could do the next 30 years or 40 years. Like, what would their potential have been? What if it was just accidental on Halloween and those drugs get laced?
Yeah.
Like, that's how strong this stuff is. It really, the only time they use fentanyl in the hospital is normally on patches. And it's like a percent of a percent. It's so fractional, and it's in a controlled way, and then they put it on you.
Yeah. Yeah, professional.
They don't be like, oh, here's a bottle. You could just 2.5 grams of it here. You could just kind of carry that around and try however much you want. That doesn't happen in the hospital. Why are we allowing it to happen on the streets?
Yeah. No, that's true. Allowed in one area, normalized in another, right? It is shocking. So these are the things that you want to address.
I think that would be where I'd start. I think you have to look at the biggest impacts, and when people are dying, that's the biggest impact. So it's either that they could be dying from financial, or that they're actually dying from drugs. They could be dying from crime. Though those are the main factors. I think that we have to start looking at. We have to protect our humanity, and right now we're allowing that to happen. We're allowing it to happen. Like, we're hoping, oh well, if I teach Timmy what this drug is and that it's bad, then that's going to stop him from being affected by it.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's not. that drug could be in anything accidentally from somebody else. Like it's just a poison that shouldn't be out there at all.
What do you think is the ability to address it from a position as an MLA position?
I think as an MLA, well, which one specifically? Drugs or health?
Well, let's hit that one because that was what we were just talking about, I guess. As
drugs. I think your strongest representation as an MLA is that you have a vote. You have a vote in the House that nobody else in your region has. That's why you're the MLA. You want to represent your region. You work with other people there to make a difference, and most of the time they're in your party. Even if they're not in your party, you can still work with opposition. You might have to work a lot harder. It might not always work. When it comes to selection of certain facilities, if they're not a good fit for your region, or if they could be put somewhere else that might not affect a school, to help advocate for the people that you represent as well, not just. I went there as a representative, as the Area B PRD representative. And I went to the meeting when it came to the safe injection site just to see what was going on, to learn the information, to figure out why Northern Health wanted it in that location, or exactly how it would work. I liked the concept of wraparound services, but me personally, I think that they just need the wraparound services first, not free use. If people have concerns, I'd be pushing locally to try and help on those. You've got another route as well, is that if Northern Health is the one choosing where that location goes, you can work with Northern Health, or you can work with the cabinet minister that controls the health ministries. Yeah. There's a lot of different options. I don't know what's being explored currently, but I think I'd do things differently.
You know how that there's that saying where when you're a kid, you swear up and down you're going to do things different than your parents, and then when you become a parent, you pretty much say and do this exact same thing. And then when you're an employee, swear to God, when you become a boss, you're not going to do it the way your bosses were doing it. And then next thing you know, you get wrapped up in the machine. Have you ever thought about when you get into politics, the intentions are genuine at the beginning, and 2 years down the road, when you're in that environment, it slowly starts to change? So
far, I've been doing everything different.
It's a good response.
Karen, I asked Karen she did it. She was in that role as director for 34 years, and some of the stuff that came up, I'm like, has this happened to you before? She's like, nope. So it's, I think I have a different approach on things. It's sometimes people may not notice, but in the meetings that we have, I'll say my vote. I'm the only one at the board that will say my vote on everything. And the reason that I say my vote...
Okay, hold on. What do you mean by say your vote? What do you mean by that?
So they used to put their hands up to vote, yay or nay. Then they switched over to electronic voting.
Okay.
When they did that, I'm partially dyslexic. And it's like the worst thing for me that if you put a computer in front of me, there's a good chance I'm pushing the wrong button.
Oh, really?
So it's just with that, and And I said, I'm like, I can't, this is like the one thing where if it's like yes or no, I'm going to screw it up, and I'm voting representing constituents. I can't vote that way. So they accommodated, and they let me vote just by saying my answer.
A verbal.
Yeah, by doing yay or nay. Sometimes it's
Does someone enter that digital vote though for you?
Yes. Yeah.
Ooh, so do you have the ability?
And then it shows on the screen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I can still see it just to make sure that nothing. But that's like the one form. Like I figured out in high school when they get you to do tests, and then you've got that Scantron sheet where it's A, B, C, or D.
Yeah.
When they say circle one of those or fill it in, I'd sometimes fill out the wrong one. And
really?
I'd mean to fill out one, and it was just the way my dyslexia was. So then a teacher figured that out, and he's like, okay, well, just write your answer on a page separate. So then when I wrote it, then I was an A student.
Wow.
On that. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I know about this now, about myself. And like there's people that are dyslexic in different ways, reading or speech, or the way that I am. But one thing that's different about when you're dyslexic is that you see things differently. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I have always done when I'm fixing things is that if I can't fix it a regular way, I find different ways. And I can see things different than most. It's just people that are dyslexic, it's kind of like that. So when I get into a scenario where some people struggle to try and find answers, I see things differently.
Yeah, well, you have a different approach.
Yeah. Well.
Oh, you don't have the blinders on by routine or patterns. You're able to kind of see different ways of tackling something that other people just...
But I know that as a weakness, and I thought of it as a weakness for a long time until I actually heard somebody say that. And they said that people that are dyslexic, they see things differently than others. And once you know that, it can be an advantage. Huh. It's almost like how certain people, that they're savants and they function one way in an amazing way, but then there's downsides.
Yep.
Well, I figured out that I was dyslexic. There's downsides to it. I figure out how to cope with that side, so it's not an issue. But I think it helps me when it comes to approaching things or thinking differently. That's probably why I like playing chess. I'm not saying that I'm the world's best chess player, but I enjoy doing it. It's just the way my mind works. So when I see things in government and I see patterns of how things are working or how people are reacting to things, I'm thinking about ways to try and fix things. And even though people may look at me like I'm just a farmer or mechanic, but you put a problem in front of me and I'll normally solve it better than most.
Yeah, well, they say you can't judge a book by its cover. And that speaks true on, I think, more and more things. And this is definitely an example of that. What would you now say? What would you actually request or want or recommend constituents to do as far as engagement, support? Now, like you're, let's say, elected. You're going out there right now, you're going to do a campaign. You're going to go through all of those motions of what it takes to be elected. Now, let's fast forward. Okay, you're elected. You are now MLA, Peace River North. Now, what would you like to see if you were to send a message on how people can positively engage in democracy and support for yourself?
Am I in power or am I
You're
shadow?
in power. No. Well, ooh, that's an interesting question. Why don't we split that down into two? Okay, let's start out with you are now official opposition, and then we can say you are now official government, part of official government, form government. John Rustad is premier, but let's start out with shadow, or no, sorry, official opposition.
Official opposition. I think the biggest thing is that when you're in opposition, you don't have that direct power. So I'd probably focus. I think I heard behind the scenes one time that Mike referenced that Dan is better behind the scenes. at working with other ministers. I think if I was shadow, that would probably be one of the biggest things that I'd focus on, of how to influence on that side of things. But when it comes to actually getting feedback from constituents of what to pursue, I'd probably look at areas where people are struggling the most.
What would you want them to understand, realize, and support you in, though? Like, where I'm going with this is because I think if you don't get proactive, you're at the mercy of reactive. And I think a lot of, that's what I see with politicians in particular, is that this isn't something that is it's not as known real time as it should be. Yeah. And usually if something happens that's negative, people rally, and you see examples of that now with what happened with the land sharing agreement. Yeah. It's just people getting upset real time, and that's a reactive instead of constant engagement and understanding. So what would you ask, or how would you want people to be able to engage and show support and exercise, their involvement and democracy in a way that's going to have a positive impact? What would that message be?
Well, I think when it comes to support, that's where they vote, and they choose who they want to support them. When it comes to, if I'm in that position, the main thing that I want is to support my constituents, not them support me. They're putting me in a position of power to fight for them. I think you've got to be based in the communities and know what's going on. A lot of the stuff is pretty evident of what people aren't happy about. You could easily just look at what people are struggling with. So whether or not it's people that are stuck in a cycle of that they're having to go to the Women's Resource Society all the time. Well, is there something that I can do when it comes to getting provincial grants to try and help the society, or just the one when it came to the farmers market, being able to do the food coupons? Those are things where the provincial side can step down to constituents and help. The other thing too is that even though I could get voted in by people that want conservatives, I represent the whole region. It's not just those people that voted by conservatives. So sure. It's the same thing in Area B. Like I represent everybody. There's no party politics in Area B. When I'm the director for that, I represent everybody.
Well, how is this any different between being opposition and official government?
I think official government is where you can really work on making legislative changes. I think the difference between the two of them is where you'd have to get creative. When you're shadow, you really have to get creative of how you can make changes. I have to say I'm pretty good at finding different solutions to things. If you're in a majority government, you have way more control over the ship, and you can make big changes happen fairly quick, or you can try and steer the ship back around and try and fix things that have been done. Yeah. The way that things are going, like there's a lot of fixing that needs to happen.
So when it comes to your message to the constituents, and I'm rounding back to that because that's where I think the engagement in the public is what either empowers or disempowers elected official. I mean, voting is definitely step one for sure.
The biggest thing that I missed is it's when people call me or email me or text me, I respond. That makes a big difference. There's a lot of people that don't get any answers to anything. Yeah. And I probably get in trouble from my wife about answering the phone so much, But that's one of the things that I signed up for, is that when people phone me, I answer, or in this scale, I'd have staff to help. But I'm going to make sure I actually respond to people in the best form I can. And preferably that's to try and make them happy.
What I've come to learn a little bit is through doing this a little bit is the ability for people that are in elected position to be able to get up-to-date information to their constituents in whatever area they're in. I think that's an obstacle a lot of people are facing, and they kind of now are going to social media a little bit more. I've noticed quite a few people are throwing more of those little reels and shorts and snippets. You know, Pierre Poilievre has capitalized on that. I've seen that with, Bob Zimmer even is doing it, and more recently, both Mike and Dan are on Facebook, and they're doing little things that are helping out with getting messaging out. But I think if I was in your position, I would focus on some way to be able to bring more awareness about all these topics that people are extremely concerned about. So healthcare, C36, that's a gnarly one. That's an animal that needs to be tackled.
Yep.
In a big way. Also education, like just about any, you can list it all. They all seem to be, pretty important.
Yeah.
So what's going on in government, provincially at least anyway, and how do you get that out so that people have a better understanding of it, so people don't have to come all the way up to Fort St. John and throw a freaking session at the Charlie Lake Hall to try and give a perspective about something that should be common knowledge, or at least talked about in mainstream a lot more than it is now. That is probably, if I was to try and send a message to any elected official, dodging the bullet and saying it's advertised and all of that kind of stuff. Come on. There is not an understanding on any one of those subjects in any way, period. And to be able to navigate through all those websites, because I'm one who's gone through a lot of that kind of stuff.
It's tricky too, though.
You go cross-eyed reading it, and then trying to find some of that information is almost near impossible, even though it's supposed to be public, and I use air quotes in a big way, because you can drown in links that get you right back to the starting point where you were 3 hours earlier.
Yeah. And on Facebook, I can put links like I think the last one that I put up was about the Emergencies Act, to let people know about that, and that they were looking at it provincially, and they said to the PRD that you've got until, I think it was December 13th to give response and feedback of what the PRD is interested in, and we asked for more time and more information, and even before it got to that date, it passed third reading in legislature. And then even the posts that I put onto Facebook, it's tough to even know if people can see it.
Well, shadow banning's a real thing.
And
people aren't seeing that.
And that's one of the tough things, is that even as an elected official, when I put that out there, I really don't know if people are seeing it. And it makes it difficult. Another option, or another problem that we had, was that we used to do a lot of advertising and bylaw announcements and issue information through the newspaper. And now we don't have a newspaper. So then what avenues do you find that can successfully get to people, say they don't have internet? So then do you pretty much have to do a mail out over everything? Well, then you do a mail out, and unless you actually list it by a person's address, a lot of people say no junk mail in their mail, like in their box. So trying to actually, and that becomes very expensive. So you have to try and find a bunch of different ways to touch base with people.
Yeah, that's something that needs to be, I think, addressed more seriously. I've got a podcast that's flying under the radar with the federal requirements now, only because I don't generate $10 million a year, but that is the first step that they rolled out. I don't see it being all that much longer before that foundation's been established, and now I'm going to have to register the RCT. Well, I'll be just probably phased out before that with shadow banning. You know,
who knows?
You never know how the way it's going. And, you know, I know a lot of people see that and, you know, they're glad because now there's more misinformation, or what's that other word they like to throw out there that's so brand new? Disinformation. Well, these words, you know. Anyway, I think you better be careful what you wish for, you know. And I think the other thing, in my rebuttal to anybody who has an issue with any of the topics that we've been kind of covering right now, is come and sit in the hot seat and actually try and articulate your point of view in a way that isn't going to be wrapped up in such strong emotion that it pretty much unravels. Articulate in a way that you're able to communicate your point of view and get your point across in a way with other people that is going to want people to form a conversation. And that's step one, I think, is to tap the brakes a little bit and figure out, if you're to sit there in a conversation, are you able to have the restraint to be able to sit there long enough to hear what other people have to say and then engage in a respectful manner in return? And if you're not able to do that, then maybe you should keep your opinion to yourself long enough to be able to get to a point where you can. And social media isn't that place. I think podcasting is definitely a good place, but it's definitely not the only option. And the way things are going right now, with a lot of the media being restricted on every level and free speech being censored, whether you like to admit that's a thing or not, it is starting to get crushed. And government is going to get, stifled in the white noise of everybody just, throwing their arms up in the air and saying enough is enough. So, going back to, what we touched on earlier, if you're in a position now where you can ever try and get some of this information to your constituents, especially in the riding that you're representing, I think every effort should be made possible to be able to get that done.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of people are looking for right now. You can't go on social media and find any kind of news source right now.
It's
and
difficult.
The stuff that's out there is questionable at best. So that's something that I think needs to be addressed, and that'd probably be a request from me is figure out a way to be able to, if you are an elected official, and even to the ones that are elected right now, in those positions, figure out a way to get that information out to people. So you can't turn around and tell them that their opinion is nonsense because they're not informed. Mm-hmm. Well, hell, come on. Get the information out there.
And that is one advantage about how at the PRD they record everything when it comes to the meetings. For getting that information out, you can just tell people to go and watch it.
Yeah.
And they can actually see it firsthand too.
They can, and the link that's going to be in descriptions is one of them, but that's not too easy to find. And if you can break it down into, I think if you're in legislature, like that 36 for that's being rolled out right now, nobody's aware of it, never mind the understanding. So these things need to be brought. Yeah, these are the things. And if you're shorted, I think in the legislature where you don't have a chance to vote, or is pushed through last minute, is presented and there's a reading and then it's pushed through before there's any kind of chance to figure out what it's all about. There's power in informing your public, and they can demand, like, they're the power that put you in that position, and they can look at what happens when you get enough people together to say, hey, whoa, we need more clarification on this, tap the brakes. And
how many people voted against that?
Which one?
36. 36.
That's it?
No.
The healthcare 36?
Yeah.
How many people voted against it?
Yeah.
I'm not too sure anybody did. How many? Do you know the answer to that?
I think it was just one.
Wow.
I'm not positive. We can look that up.
I will. I'll overlay it on this.
That's one thing that with John, there's been I think 3 times that I know of where he's only one opposing that whole house. He's not standing outside. He's not at home.
Yeah. Standing outside. I didn't know that was a thing until recently. If you don't like it, just go have a break.
Or say the party doesn't like it.
Yeah.
Amazing how that works, eh? I'd never do that. I'd rather get kicked out of the party.
Yeah. Yeah. Few people are getting kicked out for standing their ground.
So at least, that's one of the biggest things that I support about John as a leader on that is that, like, I know what it feels like to get outvoted.
Yeah.
And to be the only one, like, you think about that's a lonely position if you're the only one.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's not the only time. So I have to give him major credit for that, to be able to do that.
He sat in the seat you're sitting right now, and I asked him quite a few questions, and he handled it like a freaking champ. So he did. That's an episode I think people should listen to.
I may not be a veteran like him, but I'll get there eventually.
Absolutely. We should start wrapping it up, but now that we got through the sticky stuff, should we enjoy some whiskey?
I think so.
I'm going to give you this, my phone. I'm going to get you to record from a different angle here, and I'm going to incorporate this a little bit into the episode, and I'll get some whiskey. Just press record whenever you want there.
Where do you want me to record?
Just whatever. I'll be pouring the whiskey, and you can...
Ooh, Kevin in the kitchen.
So what kind of whiskey did you want? You wanted this one, didn't you?
Yeah, that looks really unique.
Yeah.
Game of Thrones. Where did you even get that from?
It was given to me. I don't know. I have a lot of the stuff, people just bring bottles. And this one
Did they bring it to you that empty, or did you drink all of that?
No, I drank this with various guests. This one here, I don't remember. I think this is proper 12, but it says Dan's Rentals because this decanter is from Dan's. He's a huge supporter. The whiskey, that's what it was. It was proper 12, which is
okay.
Conor McGregor. So what we'll do is we'll put this in here. And then you tell me when to stop.
That'll be good.
Do you want it smoked?
Let's see it, sure.
Okay,
I never
so
actually tried one of the smoked ones before.
We've got applewood here. We've got oak. We've got cherry, and we've got hickory wood. Which one would you like?
Go for the applewood.
Okay. Here we go with the applewood. So, one of the things that I tried before I got this, and this was a gift too. I think my wife got this for me. And one of the things that I tried before I got this was I thought, well, I'll just smoke water and then pour it into ice cubes, and then when it melts into the whiskey, it would flavor the whiskey. And so I thought, oh, that's a hell of an idea. So we took water, boiled it so it was hot, and then as it cooled, we poured it into a cookie sheet, so it's just a thin sheet of water, and then put it in a smoker. And then as it cooled, it would absorb the smoke and the flavor. And then after we smoked it, we poured it into ice cube trays. And then I'd put it in a drink, and we'd let it thaw out and hopefully get the smoky flavor. That doesn't work.
No.
That was a bad idea.
All that story for doesn't work.
No, so don't do that. So this is going to be yours. You just...
I guess you probably wouldn't want to do that with 151.
With 151? Proof?
Well, would it... Could you actually... Maybe.
It might.
80%.
Yeah, that probably would. I bet you it would flash off.
Oh, wow, it really sinks.
Yeah. Well, it cools off, and then it just sits there. The
Oh, I
smoke
totally...
cools off.
I didn't think it would do that.
It's pretty cool stuff, isn't it? So, I'll take this off. There you go, sir.
Bon appetit. I'll wait for you.
I'm going to go with the same. I'm going to try the apple.
Do I want to have it right away, or do I just wait for you?
You can just wait.
Okay.
Well, cheers.
I didn't know if it would like evaporate.
No, the flavor's in there. Actually, the resin off of the smoke comes out of these. Here, I'll show you.
Oh, okay.
This
The resin
part here.
drops.
Well, when you smoke it or burn it, see all these little. Are you recording this part?
Yeah. Oh,
See
sorry.
see these little holes?
Yeah.
That's where the smoke comes out. And then it hits the glass, and it builds a bit of a resin.
Oh, okay.
So you don't want to have too much on there because then it gets really strong. I learned that the hard way.
Oh, yeah. Right through those little holes.
Yep. It hits the glass.
Oh, yeah, I got that.
And then it builds this little resin. So you want to smoke it so that the smoke goes into the whiskey. But don't forget about the resin. It's almost like salting the rim. Oh, that's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
There you go. Well, cheers.
Cheers. Good times.
Oh, man. That is so good.
Oh. That's not bad.
Cheers. Oh, you took the whole shot already. Oh, man.
Yeah.
There you go. You want another shot?
I'm good with that. I gotta drive.
Fair enough. Well, I'm glad we were able to have this opportunity. Anything that kind of sticks out, though? Like what we talked about?
Oh, you bring that up after the whiskey shot, eh?
Well, a little close. It's not going to get too in depth. I'm just don't like to leave loose ends.
All I can say is this is another thing that is new to me. I didn't think that I would be in this scenario 5 years ago. But so far, it has flowed very smoothly. And I've adapted to what gets thrown at me. That is incorporating local constituents that have supported me throughout the whole route. And I think I've done my best to represent them. Mm-hmm. I think I'd do some things differently, but I think I've represented people properly. I think going forward, it'll definitely be a learning curve again.
You're going for a ride. Boy, oh boy.
One thing that I got from my dad, and that he was a natural shit disturber.
Oh yeah.
And it sometimes it worked good for him, and sometimes it didn't. And this so far this past year, I haven't actually tried to be a shit disturber whatsoever. Things have just come up, and I just try and roll with the punches. But going forward, I think when we look at the scale of some of the things that have to get dealt with, and I think they have to get dealt with in a different manner than they're currently doing it. I think I'm going to have to utilize that shit disturber a little bit to shake things up, and actually help make that change happen. And I'm pretty creative with how I can do it sometimes, but I do it with the best of intentions, and I don't think there's many other people that could do it like me, especially when I have the best of intentions at heart when I make decisions, not what I'm getting paid, who I'm making friends with, or what type of power I'm going to get out of it. I'm doing this for constituents. That's the only reason I got into this job. So if people want change to happen, I'm going to make it.
Man, that's awesome. God damn, that was a Braveheart speech. Wow.
You'll never take my freedom.
Well, that's freaking awesome. Well, I think if anyone's listened up till now, I guess they're on for the long haul. So we'll put in a few more minutes. But I would like to try and wrap it up a little bit by saying thank you. You just wrapped it up. I thought you were so we'll be here for a little while, eh? Cheers. Thanks for getting involved. Thanks for putting yourself in the line of fire and trying to be that change, trying to put your mouth or your, what did they say? They putting the
money where your mouth is.
Exactly. And I think anybody who thinks it's an easy task, should get involved. And I think that at the very least, I'm curious to see how this is going to play out. And with the best intentions that you've got, I hope there's a lot of support. Actually,
I just thought of one more thing.
What is that?
One of the things that when it comes to when I think about constituents and when they need help, I'm a big guy, and I can hold my own pretty good. Down in the Lower Mainland, I used to get bullied when I was a little kid. And actually, the size that I am right now, like at 6'4", 280 pounds, I was that size in high school.
Oh, really? Oh.
But surprisingly, I was the one that was getting bullied by kids that were in gangs because they thought that they'd look that much better if they could beat up a big guy. Yeah. And when you deal with gangs and weapons and stuff, I stood up for myself, and it worked when you say you deal with like 2 people or 3 people. And then it started to become more, and these gangs were definitely something different than you deal with, like from up here. So then I had to, when I stood up for myself, I actually had to do it in the classroom where there's just 2 of these people at least. They didn't have their whole gang. And what's really sad is that you stand up for yourself, and then they go after your friends. Mm. So then you look at who's supporting your friends, and they don't really have it. So then you support your friends, and once that works, it's great. Yourself and your friends are doing good. And then they go on to the next person. It's just a trend that I saw, and it was something that I really hated, but it was something that I struggled with when I was younger, as to how to deal with. And I've grown up fighting bullies, and I feel like in real life I'm still doing that, but I feel like I'm one of the best people to do it. So when people have problems and they need help, then I'm going to be there to help them.
Man, I love that. There's a lot of truth to what you just said too. And government and a liberal mindset, even though it comes across with all-inclusive, go against the narrative and they're going to bully you. You speak different, they're going to bully you. You don't toe the line, they're going to bully you. And so that trait is coming out in you where people are getting pushed around, and it's supposed to be with the best interest of the public. But if you speak any different and on any level, they're going to bully you. So that's, I think that resonates, and that's going to land with a lot of people, because bullying is not really looked all that highly on now, whereas it was before. And it just seems like underneath a different pretext is put up with. But at the end of the day, when you're coerced or pushed into something that you don't really like, that's bullying.
Well, and I can make myself a pretty big target, so at least I can help block other people.
Yeah. Ooh.
I don't mind doing that.
Yeah. Well, cheers to that.
Yeah.
Hey, reach over. Yeah. Man, that's good. Well, cheers to everybody. Shout out to Karen. I know she doesn't like being on the radar, but she, I mean, there's a support system there. So
She didn't even want her name in my bio.
oh, now she's been mentioned a few times here.
You've totally labeled her. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's one of those things that I wouldn't be in the same scenario if I didn't have her supporting me.
Yeah.
So it's, even though it's, she just went through a surgery and she's struggling through that, and I help her in every way I can on that. Everything on this, she's helping me.
Wow.
So we do what we can.
Awesome. Awesome. Right on. Well, that's a hell of a good note to end on.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, we'll see you guys later. And vote Jordan Kealy.
I like it.
What are you running for?
Conservatives.
In what region?
Peace River North.
That's right. All right. Take care.
Have a good one.